Welcome to Tech Out West, where we unveil the tech leaders of tomorrow, today. I'm Paul Mikesell.
And I'm Sarah Lindquist. Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind the startups, the visionaries, and the relentless spirit that defines entrepreneurship in the wild frontier of technology.
Hey, Sarah, who do we have today on Tech Out West?
Well, Paul, we have Jason Murray, who is the co-founder and CEO of Shipium.
That's interesting. You know, I also went to college with him.
Well, that's fun. It's going to be a great conversation. Let's dive in.
And here we are today with the famous Jason Murray. Jason, what is Shipium?
Hey, thanks. Great to be here. Shipium is a e-commerce logistic technology platform. So if you think about the e-commerce supply chain as a series of decisions, if you do a good job on each of those decisions through the cycle, you get better outcomes in terms of speed and cost. Shipium is trying to optimize all those decisions, where to put inventory, how to flow inventory through the network, what transportation or carrier you should use. All those things matter a lot in terms of speed and cost. All this stuff I kind of picked up from my years and years at Amazon on how to build a efficient e-commerce supply chain.
I would love if you could walk back in time and tell us about where you're from. Tell us about your family, what it was like growing up.
Yeah, so that's good. I think a lot of the Shipium story actually kind of comes from my background, how I got there, et cetera. But yeah, I was actually born in the Pacific Northwest, I grew up in the Bothell area, which is north of Seattle, if you don't know the Seattle area. And, kind of in the shadow of Microsoft, was at a very early age, super interested in programming. I have a photo somewhere of myself with like an Atari 400, programming at 7 or 8 years old, trying to figure it out. It kind of continued to be an interest through my high school years. Obviously I had a pretty normal childhood, et cetera, but eventually went to the University of Washington at the time. That's where I met Paul, but studied, went down the computer engineering track, learned it was, there was kind of a lot happening in the 90s. The internet had just kind of come online, et cetera. So very exciting. I eventually graduated from there, went to this startup at the time called B Square, which I think is like still around in some form or another. But around 1999, I kind of like that startup was very focused on things related to kind of compilers, operating systems, kind of what you'd consider to be old school computer sciencey stuff. And at the time, a recruiter reached out to me from Amazon, and I kind of was feeling like I've got to get myself more wired into what's starting to happen with the internet. And at the time I liked Amazon compared to a lot of the stuff that was out there because I felt like it was kind of a tangible benefit to me. I was already ordering books and stuff from them, and I liked the concept. But I went to Amazon. Eventually, I got kind of ended up in this space that was focused on logistics and technology. So at the time it was the fulfillment centers, right? So kind of the how do we run and manage and operate and optimize these fulfillment centers, which now is very commonplace. You see them all over the place. But back in 1999, it was totally mind blowing, right? Like we were writing to these little terminal apps that people were carrying around, and they were it was telling them where to go. It was telling them what to pick. It was keeping track of where all the inventory was. And so that kind of began my lifelong love affair with logistics and tech and how do those two things work together. And like I said, very novel back then, not so, very common now, right? You see there's lots of companies kind of focused on this, et cetera. But so my Amazon arc did fulfillment center technology through I'll say like 2007 or 2008, went into management eventually. I then helped start the Fulfilled by Amazon program at Amazon, which is now kind of the main engine that is how they're kind of selling seller fulfilled good in the Prime model.
Was that around shipping? The Fulfilled by Amazon, or what is that program?
Yeah, that's great. I think so. Amazon, the way to think about it is the first iteration of Amazon was all kind of what we would call first party, right? So they were effectively buying inventory, bringing it into the building, and then they would sell it at a markup. And around 2007 or 8, they started kind of looking at this more marketplace model. And so the traditional marketplace model is something like an eBay, right? Where the seller is fulfilling, you're paying the seller kind of all the effectively the marketplace ends up matching the supply and the demand. The transaction comes through, the platform takes some cut of that revenue, and then the seller fulfills it, right? And the FBA program, when we built it in 2007, 2008, the concept behind it was the seller sends their inventory into the building and then Amazon fulfilled it, right? And I think the interesting kind of historical tidbit on this is at the time, the reason we were trying to do this is because we thought this would give us some leverage on eBay, if you can believe it or not, right? Like eBay was such a dominant marketplace force in that 2008, 2009 timeframe that we were doing this to kind of like, okay, we've got all these buildings. There's got to be some way to kind of leverage that as a benefit. But what no one understood at the time was that Prime was going to eventually take off, right? And so we thought it was going to be more of a like simplify the life for sellers. What happened in 2009, 2010 was the Prime program started going, right? And then it became effectively this marketing engine for that fulfilled by Amazon plus the first party stuff. And then
remember Prime is like always being there.
I right? Yeah. No, we if you go back in time, Amazon was actually starting to struggle with growth in that period, 2007, 2008. And we were looking at the data, right? I mean, this, and you started seeing this. And I think everyone was kind of lukewarm on Prime, right? It was like it was like, oh, you're going to have a subscription for shipping? That seems weird, right?
The idea was out at that time.
Yeah, it was kind of like someone had pitched it. And I think.
Was Jeff Holden part of this Prime thing?
Yeah, he was definitely involved in that in that whole thing. But
he was a big part of that.
Yeah, he was. I think that was all. It was all this kind of mix, and I think when you talk, everyone's like, when you go back in time, everyone's like, oh yeah, I invented the internet on a napkin. Like it's kind of like that's the like there's everybody's there's but I think it was I think legitimately. There was skepticism. There were some people that were positive in pushing it. And I think what really though popped it, right, was we started looking at data and like as soon as someone signed up for Prime, 4 times as much, right? They just started buying like crazy. And so then your business strategy effectively becomes, how do you sign more people up for Prime, right? Like that's because that's going to grow the business.
This is interesting. I guess everybody worked on Prime and nobody had anything to do with the Fire phone.
Yes, right? Exactly. Yeah. Hey man. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Monday morning quarterback. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. No, there was I mean, I think Bezos's greatest trait was how long he was able to keep that experimentation type culture way past how mature the company was, right? I think that was the most, because I mean, I wasn't involved in AWS, but that was all happening also in the background. He was willing to kind of experiment and play with this Prime stuff, the fulfilled by Amazon stuff that I just talked about. But those two things together ended up being this really great combo, because what you ended up with is you could it eventually led to sellers from China, for example, sending their stuff in, and then it acted as this fulfillment engine for all those things coming over. So
this is all before delivery, before there were Amazon trucks and Amazon planes.
Yeah, that came a little later, and that was my big 2010 or so. I created this. I basically took over what is now the Amazon supply chain, right? And it kind of was this tech stack that effectively, we call it Scott, or supply chain optimization tech. We kind of like rebranded it as we brought a bunch of things together, but it was things like, forecasting how much stuff people will buy, where do you position inventory to get it as close to people so it's fast and cheap, how do you flow inventory through the networks, inventory and orders through the network such that it stays kind of in position, etc. What do you tell people, like what promise do you give them, what kind of transportation lane do you use on the back end? And that system that we kind of ended up building, it was outside of things like the order management system and the website and the warehouse management system, kind of the stuff that was going in the walls of that. And that system that I built out was really kind of the idea or the offspring of what Shipium is trying to become, right? Like the observation when I got at Amazon, just to kind of fast forward a little bit, was that I kind of got out and I'm like, this is totally lacking from the rest of the industry, right? All of this like transportation, shipment, inventory coordination that we got so good at. And I knew just you could you could cut billions of dollars out of these P&Ls by doing this efficiently, this optimization. And so the concept with Shipium was really like, how do I take that and package it up in a way that I can make it available to the rest of the market, right? And then you have like favorable stuff like, Amazon is 57% of e-commerce right now, but e-commerce continues to grow at this steady clip. We obviously had like the pandemic bump, but even if you draw a line through it, it's still kind of moving up. And so there's this inevitability to the fact that Amazon won't be able to maintain that kind of market share forever. And so the belief is that there's going to be this kind of unbundling of Amazon to kind of spread it out through the market. And I think there's been lots of, I'll just say like ways people have tried to do that. What have you seen? Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the classic one you see a lot of was people were Amazon was very vertically integrated internally, right? So they owned everything. Like, Paul just mentioned, we had everything from the trucks delivering to people to the all the way up the stack, all the technology and everything involved. And so I think the initial thought on how do you bring Amazon out is you build these like big logistics companies that are going to cover all the ground of that, right? And so there's like Flexport's been floating around, and obviously there's been a lot of drama and stuff around that. There's the Convoys, a lot of these like the kind of ShipBobs of the world. Deliverr got bought by Shopify, but it's these companies that have a quasi operational component. So you kind of package it all together and you get both together, right? And I think the concept with Shipium, or the big idea, if you will, was let's try to sell the tech separately, right? Because I'm obviously heavily biased because this is kind of my world, but my thought is that the tech is what really differentiated Amazon. It was less about the obviously like culture and operational excellence and the people and the scale to some degree all matter, right? They're factors. But I felt like the thing that was really magical about Amazon is we had gotten so good at mixing these kind of like physical world problems with the tech stack, right? And how do you kind of think about those as this incorporated? To me, that was like the greatest innovation at Amazon. You kind of this digital physical mix, and that was not a common thing 20 years ago, right? Everything was kind of mostly all digital, all working in the context of a machine, as opposed to really thinking about it. It's much more common now. Like you've got Tesla and robot companies and lots of stuff happening all over the place. But that was kind of the thing, right?
Yeah.
When you guys you were there when Amazon started doing the delivery directly as well.
Yeah.
I remember there was one Christmas, I can't remember the year, but where Amazon had this like delivered by Christmas guarantee, and they leaned heavily into it. And basically the end of the story is all of the shippers failed by like a month for you guys. It was and it was ridiculous. And Amazon, it goes back to these shippers, and they're like, hey, you guys failed to deliver all the stuff you promised. And I'm sure I worked at UPS for a while loading trailers,
Yeah.
I'm sure UPS was just like, what do you want us to do? Right?
Couldn't hire enough people.
Yeah. And then, so then it was, I think it was the very next year where Amazon's like, we got trucks too. And I always really admire that about Amazon and Bezos, particularly that he wasn't afraid to say, okay, you know what? You can't do it. We'll do it. Fine.
Yeah.
Fine. We also, the only thing I remember about UPS Christmas time, this has nothing to do with anything, but we were Teamsters, we were a union shop, trailers and whatever. And every time at Christmas, they would give us a frozen turkey. And so you would walk out. So like one day you'd be leaving the shop and there'd be a giant refrigerator truck and everybody would hand you a turkey, And so the little union joke was that at other companies we had a Christmas bonus, but at UPS we give you the bird. How about that?
That's good.
So,
that's good.
But the refrigerator truck kind of reminds me of this like Uber Freight.
Yeah.
Where they tried to step into what Amazon was trying. Let's optimize the delivery. And it was a catastrophe because these things are so specialized. So you can't just, it's not like Uber. You can't just be like, I need any Prius to pick me up. It's like, I need a refrigerator truck that has this kind of suspension guarantee, and blah, blah, blah. And then like a flatbed shows up, like that kind of thing. So Amazon must have really struggled with this as well, right? Because you're delivering like not just books, but table saws and refrigerators and televisions and microwaves. And
I think your insight was really interesting. It's very and actually it's, I think something that people don't pick up on a lot was that I think Amazon, like, we were kind of trying to avoid getting into the carrier space because it's such a tough, like, thing, right? And the getting it to kind of, you know, like, the margins on it are razor thin, and you know, it's so hard to get that density, right, to required to do it. And I think that's why we waited so long. And it was exactly what you said. The problem was less about, one narrative is we could do it more efficiently because we're vertically integrated and we have all this data that people don't have. The other narrative is the customer experience was not up to snuff. And actually, a lot of the early versions of that technology were developed kind of overseas, because we initially, like, if you've ever been to, if you ever lived in England, the Royal Mail thing is just like this total kind of monopolistic, you know, and we kept trying to get them to change their, you know, like, we need you to, you know, be more, we need to bring your cost structure down, be more prescribed. And they're just like, no, we're not doing that, you know. And so similar kind of across some of these countries. And so some of the original technology, but after, I think it was 2012, I think that's maybe the season that it just, like, the kind of a couple of the carriers melted down, and that was the point in time where we're like, we need to kind of take this into our own hands because we're jeopardizing customer experience. Ultimately, when someone calls you at Amazon, they don't really care who delivered it. They're like, why is my package late? Like, you're responsible for it, and so that's what you're kind of stuck with. So, but your second point about specialized stuff, that's like why logistics things are so hard, right? Because it's like, it's hard to explain this to people, but nothing basically it's like physics, you know, there you go. Like, I mean, it's always, you end up in these like heavy, bulky things, fragile things. Clothes can compress down into smaller things. Really small things can be shipped in mailboxes, right? I mean, all of these, and that's why a lot of these problems, software is really a good tool to, it's been a great lever for Amazon, and why I think they continue to be on top is because they're so much better at kind of taking in all this data and trying to make good decisions around it, which they're still going to miss a lot of the time, but it's just like too complicated for humans to possibly get their head around, right? You know?
Right. And it's combinatorial, right? Like, you have
totally
these it's a packing,
right?
On many more dimensions, right?
Yeah.
Like, bin packing and location specific or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And so you're not, and so you're trying to find ways to get density so that you can have kind of more frequent stops for your delivery folks. And so obviously scale matters, but then how you kind of share between carriers and all this stuff also matters. So it's a very hard problem.
So you saw this hole in the market. Opportunity. But did you already leave Amazon at that point?
Yeah, I left in 2018 because I kind of just, ultimately I needed a change, right? Like, I needed to. I was there 19 years. Yeah, and I had, you know, when I started there, it was effectively a startup, right? It was, right. You know, not quite. They had gone public, but you know, we were like sleeping under our desks and all that. It was very exciting, right? Like, we had all these. We were just trying to, like, things were falling apart left and right as this massive growth was going on. It had all the normal startup things where the technology didn't keep up with the demand, and we were all kind of trying to figure this out. And on top of that, in those days, you didn't have nearly the kind of baseline technical infrastructure that people have now. They don't have Redis and, you know, DynamoDB and all the other, you know, that stuff is all totally missing. And so we were trying to figure out how to kind of scale this. And it was a total disaster, right? I mean, everything was falling apart all the time, and we were kind of going through that. But I went into management, and you know, as Amazon just got larger and larger, and it, you know, I think literally millions of people working there, right? You end up in this world that's much different than what I signed up for, right? But I'm not complaining, because obviously the Amazon stock was crazy and it was a great run. And I think there was something actually very interesting, at least through, I'll say like 2015 or 2016, of just seeing that level of scale, right? Like you just, the number of how you run something at that level of scale was kind of this really interesting thing to watch, where you started to kind of literally disrupt the supply lines from China and things like blowing out UPS, right? Like that's a great, your company is now so large that you're ruining the one of the two largest shippers in the US, right? I mean, it's that kind of stuff was fascinating to watch, and how you go through that process. But I wanted to get back into something that was smaller and more, I was building again. And I kind of thought I was going to maybe find like a startup that was, a little further along, and I could kind of be like they did the 0 to 1 and I could do the 1 to 10, or, one of those things. But, it's actually kind of hard to find something like that's right and matches and stuff. And in the process, I was talking to VCs about where to find these, and they're like, maybe you should start a company. And I'm like, well, and then it kind of, the ideas formed, and the rest is history. But, it was exactly what you said. You see how that world works when it's working correctly, the e-commerce engine. And it's lacking outside of Amazon, right? It's very clear why people are kind of getting their asses kicked.
Sure. I want to ask you a couple of questions about early Amazon.
Yeah.
Is it true, or maybe when you got there, was it still the case that they had one giant statically linked binary?
Yes, actually. It was called, God, I don't get it right. It was called Obidos, right? And we actually, I'm going to go like full blown nerd here for a minute.
This is amazing.
So just
some of the people watching will be programmers, and maybe we can explain a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know. Even programmers that didn't deal with this, like programmers who started 2005 forward might be like, what the hell is he even talking about? Yeah. Like this is like my version of punch cards, right? Like I'm just feeding them into the machine. We had the way the thing got, it used to be that you would compile your code and then you had to link it all together, right? And that's kind of, maybe C++ still does that, et cetera. And there was this concept of kind of like statically linked binaries versus dynamically linked binaries, and everything in Amazon was all statically linked. Everyone kept attaching tendrils off of the same thing because we had like one giant database, and it went from like 10 minutes to 20 minutes to 30 minutes to finish the linking on this thing. But the funny thing is it kind of created this weird little counter economy, because like a new box would get provisioned for developers, and the guy would kind of hide that he had access to this box. And I remember like I lost my shit. Like I think I like almost threw someone's laptop out, PC out the window at the time. Yeah. I'm like, Rick, God damn it, you've been hiding this thing from us. You're linking in under 10 minutes, right? it was just, it like kind of had this, we became like, like Lord of the Flies trying to get this thing to link, et cetera. But it was a total mess.
So this should be like if you had like a city, and you had a house, and you bought one car, and you said, great, we got our car, we got groceries, et cetera. But then you had like a neighborhood, and instead of buying more cars, you said, why don't we just graft on like a trailer to this thing? Yeah. And pretty soon you're like city size, and you still got the one car, but now it's like got, now it's a train of like specialized, there's a snow plow, and there's like all this stuff. And at some point you've got to say like, hey, But that's what happens when you're growing and you're going so fast, and it's just like, we can't change. We got to do it,
No, there were so many things back then that were just painful to do, just infrastructure-y things that were just really hard to do. And including how you laid out, the HTML stuff was painful. The back, like we were using Oracle databases at the time, and it was it was like it was actually a big deal to kind of split things into different databases, because you had to kind of keep them in sync through some queue, but there wasn't a queue technology to send messages. So it was all very very clunky, right? And you look at it now, and there's all these pieces, like you can get on Azure or AWS or whatever, and they've got all these pieces to just make this stuff all work pretty simply. But there was a lot of like infrastructure things that had to happen, right? And I mean, it was I'm trying to think of the other, like even the memory stuff, right? Like, because we had all these memory leaks in the code, and of course, like now you have Java or somebody that is actually collecting memory. And back then, though, we would just kind of like kick the thing every 30 minutes and start it over, right? Because it was just eating up memory, and then it would eventually, then the innovation was like the thing is able to determine itself that it's about to die and just kill itself, and so it would start over, right? Like some stuff like that, right?
I think all of us who started programming in the 90s had experiences like that. We're working at some company, and you're scaling so hard.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we're never going to fix these memory leaks. Why don't we try and detect when it's leaking itself to death? Set something else up to handle that case. Like people forget, man. When you're scaling and you're ramping, it is not time to start messing around with the infrastructure. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can you talk about becoming a VP at Amazon? That's like Amazon's notoriously difficult to even last for 2 years. I mean, I see guys all the time. You're like 1 year and 2 months, and they're just like, I couldn't take it anymore. Yeah. You were 25 years there?
19.
Oh, sorry, 19 years there. If you had a kid when you started at Amazon, that kid would be driving, right, and would be drinking alcohol in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And if we all see the resumes, and nobody's at Amazon longer.
Yeah.
5 years, you're like, oh my God. You're like anointed. It's like that scene in Goodfellas. Like you know what I mean? Like,
I'm a made man. Yeah,
exactly.
I have a lot of positive things from Amazon. I think, like, I'm a very mission driven person. So I really, from the earliest days at Amazon, the thing that I liked the most about it was just that you'd kind of hear these little stories about, in the early days, it was like, oh, I was able to, I didn't have to go out Christmas shopping for my kid to buy these toys. This is great. Or, and obviously back then it was like more of a selection play and kind of curated things as opposed to this prime, what we have now. But I loved the fact that it just felt like you were making people happy, right? Like you were giving people time back, which is this great thing. And so, I think that, in conjunction with, obviously, like I got paired up with a bunch of really cool people in multiple phases, through my time there. But we were all kind of building towards this thing of like, how do you get people access to retail in this super easy way? And it kind of just kept getting better over the years. And so I felt like that's kind of what kept me going. That was the fuel. And then I think on top of that, you just had all these really cool problems to solve, right? And I got, it was always early on, like we talked about, it was a lot about infrastructure and just making things work and trying to think about how to build these systems in a little more scalable way. Later on, though, as I started to build the supply chain out in kind of 2010, that's when we started bringing in data scientists, right? And that became this fascinating problem of, it's all easy now, but back then it was very much like, how do we use these predictive tools, these, random forest ML algorithms or whatnot, to see how we improve our forecasting or whatnot. And I've told the story to a couple of people, but 2011, I was talking to this professor, I don't remember where he's from, and he's like, Jason, we're using these gaming chips to like to train these sets, and it's working really well. It's really efficient. It's really interesting. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool idea. I wonder if that'll ever become a big thing, and now you have like NVIDIA and all, like what it's turned into. But exposure to that and using that to solve real world problems, I just thought it was so exciting. And I think for me, what kind of ultimately, when I lost the mojo, was just when you start to get detached from, you start to feel like you're not really it doesn't really matter if you're there or not in terms of actually contributing to the mission, right? And that's a testament to, if you're Bezos, right, you're simultaneously trying to get to the point, like literally he didn't even matter, right? That's such a great, he scaled that company to the point that he can leave and nothing happens, right? The stock is doing great, et cetera. And that's what his job is, right? But from a personal level, that's what kept me going. I never really cared about it was a very intense culture, like
So from the get-go, right when you joined.
It was very intense, right? It was very cutthroat. There was, if you weren't able to get your job done, you were going to get fired. Everyone knew that. It was and I think that kind of, in my opinion, is how you build excellence in an organization, right? It's hard to, we didn't have in the early 2000s, we weren't profitable, right? Everyone was kind of working towards that goal of getting to the scale and efficiencies in the processes that you actually were profitable. But those early kind of 2000 through 2010, it was a very intense environment, but you just could feel that you were changing things, right? And that to me was worth it. It was worth the probably lack of work-life balance and all these other things that you kind of lose out on. So,
and a famously staggered vesting schedule as well, right? Isn't it isn't it something like 10%, 20%? How does that work? How does that go?
They did so I think it was kind of options when I first started, and I actually found my option agreement a little while ago, and I was like, man, Jason, if you would have just, gotten hooked on heroin and spent the last 20 years doing nothing and just letting this vest, you'd be a lot better off. But anyway, no, I'm just kidding. We went from that to after kind of the whole, you remember those years where there was the people were getting in trouble with options because of the tax stuff, and that became a huge problem. Yeah. So then they went to RSUs, I think about the same time that Microsoft and whatnot did. But the company was capped at $160,000 salary, right? So Bezos couldn't make more than that, and everything else was equity. And it was 4 years stacked, right, on kind of this concept of what's your total compensation over these next years based on the current value, but just very, very equity heavy compared to a Google or a Microsoft or anything else. And I think Bezos was a big believer. He obviously had those famous kind of core principles, core leadership principles, et cetera. But the big one, and one of the biggest ones in my opinion, was ownership, right? It was just this, people have to be totally invested in it. They have to be totally in on this company to be successful. And I to me, I think after doing a startup, it's almost like the more interesting thing for Bezos was the 90s where he was getting the thing off the ground. But the more interesting thing to me is the fact that he was so deliberate about what he wanted to do with his culture in the early 2000s to kind of build what was going to be required to build this juggernaut, right? And that was all part of it, defining what kind of people, how you interact with them, what needs to happen, et cetera. And you look at a Microsoft, and I don't think I think Gates is still the GOAT, right? Obviously, but he didn't he probably should have spent more time in maybe the 90s defining what did he want the company to be, right? And maybe he did. I don't know. I wasn't there, but I got the impression that Microsoft was a little bit more the culture just kind of happened to it, as opposed to it was kind of developed. And Bezos, I felt was engineering it, and that was one of the big innovations of his kind of push there.
There's that famous diagram about the different corporate hierarchies or whatever. And the Amazon one looks like a tree where it's all perfect. And the Microsoft one is a bunch of groups all independent pointing guns at each other.
Right. Yeah.
That does. How was that? Culture has become a pretty important theme on this podcast we're doing. It comes up.
Definitely.
Can you explain how that culture was disseminated to the rest of the people? How did that culture get explained? Was it explained, or was it just through osmosis, or how did this happen?
I mean, I think there was a little bit of, I think the decision to kind of, anytime you have, cultural, like I get what you're kind of asking, which is like, how do you, like in practice, what do you do? And I think it ends up being these kind of levers you can pull to try to kind of push it through the system. And some of them are a little softer, like how it shows up in the all hands or what you kind of talk about. But right. For Amazon, a lot of it had to do with kind of this explicit, like, here are the 10 operating principles that we're going to run with. And they were, I've heard culture described as kind of almost like who's not in it, right? As a way to anchor on what it is. And the fascinating thing, when those principles came out, there's always like, everyone has their list of like, like positive and just these kind of like very, very generic, like we all work together. We're honesty. We're dedicated to the company, right? Like there's always these kind of normal, these things that came out. But when that list came out, they were very weird at first, right? It was like disagree and commit. Like you would never, if you think about it, that's just kind of saying like, yes, like don't it's basically saying like, look, there's going to be disagreements at some point. We all have to decide on something. So once it happens, we need to execute. So quit fucking around with this thing. Right. And that was a weird thing, right? The like explicit kind of frugality, and that was almost a nod to like, we're not Google. This is a retailer. We have low margins. We're running these operations. Like, you're not getting free drinks. You're not getting free food. It's like, this is, and so if you don't, all of that force the hand on, if those things are important to you, then this isn't the right place for you. Right. And that's kind of that takes so much like bravery as a leader to push on, this is how this place is going to be. And for me, it was like, I liked the blue collar aspect to it. And it was so appealing to me because we almost took it as this like badge of honor. Totally. Like we're not soft like these companies. We're driving, we're able to work in these conditions and work through this stuff. And, but you leave a lot of people out. And there was always kind of these discussions around like, we can't get principal engineers to come here because they want to work on papers or, whatever. And it all had to be, so there was these iterations through that of like, who do you bring in and how do you gate this stuff? And, but to specific mechanisms, Bezos made a decision to ban PowerPoints. That was an interesting one. We had like a hiring with this kind of concept called bar raisers, which was basically,
I wanted to hear about hiring.
Yeah, it was, but it was the interview loops were kind of, you had like, kind of, you developed this community of people that acted as a single authority. We're not going to bring in B players. We're going to bring in people that fit the culture. They were kind of trained around how do you continue to hire people that are going to fit this culture, right? To continue to perpetuate it, et cetera. I think there was a lot of, I guess like training is probably the word, but it was like, this is what our culture is. Managers need to understand this. This needs to be pushed down to people, et cetera. I think in thinking back about it retrospectively, though, I think a big part of it is hiring. Like that's where you get your biggest lever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Can you talk about bar raisers a little bit? I'm interested. Yeah. I've seen other companies. I've been at other companies who try to emulate that, and they emulate almost entirely terribly. Where the only metric is, did the bar raiser say no? 20% of the time, or something like that.
Yeah.
I made the point at one point. I was like, look, if we had a bar raiser show up and say, I'm going to say no to everybody I interview on Friday, they would meet the bill. That they were asked to do. Yeah. We have to. This is not working for us. Not at Amazon. This is other companies. So how did Amazon get this so right? And it seems like every time somebody tries to emulate it, it's just a disaster.
Some of it, I think. So the first thing is,
we explain it for the.
Yeah, sorry. So you had this kind of community of people that there had to be a bar raiser on every interview loop, and effectively the job of the bar raiser was to make sure that you were keeping you were raising the bar on hiring, right? It was, and so I think there's a couple things, but the first thing, which maybe doesn't answer your specific question, is you have to get really comfortable with this notion of like, basically, I'm trying to get this wrong. It's either false negatives, right? And the thinking is that it's like the holistic thinking around it is that it's so expensive to get rid of bad people that you're going to miss out on good people. Right. And I think it's like debatable, right? Like we kind of like went into it consciously at Amazon, but it is, if you've ever been a manager and especially it's like the whole thing around how much, bringing in the wrong people can screw up your mission. Right. It's such a huge thing. You have to just be like all comfortable that you're going to miss out on good people. Right. And I think we would, there's like always going to be anecdotes of, this guy went to Google and now he's this, the superstar, and that's fine. Then I think the second thing though, is there has to be this kind of like active participation on how are you calibrating? What are you using to calibrate? What's the, like, looking back on, did this work or not? Are we letting people, and kind of constantly monitoring, like, is the goal to say no, or is the goal to kind of try to find and harvest the right people, right? And are you not bringing in the right set of people, and that active thing? But as a leader, I think one of your biggest levers is who you hire, and it's unfortunately not very fun. Like, I don't think anyone really enjoys recruiting, but it's like the thing that you should be spending a massive amount of your time on as a leader. And it's this unfortunate, I think the playbook in smaller companies is you can usually rely on your network and say like, oh, I worked with this guy, is awesome. This gal, she's awesome, I'm going to bring her in. Right. That's great. But the challenge is when you kind of reach this scale, like, how do you find good people? And I mean, it was always like, we can't hire enough good software developers, right? Like this was the, I'm sure you felt that, like, the mantra through the 2000. Now there's like, companies are kind of cutting back, and I think maybe it's finally kind of, the market's changed, but for the longest time it was just like, how do you find good people, and the process you go through to do that, right?
I don't know that the companies now, I mean, there are massive layoffs happening, if you look at who they're laying off, they're probably not laying off the Jason Murrays.
Yeah, well,
they're not just randomly.
Yeah, it's definitely
20%.
Yeah,
right. Those people were.
Yeah.
I feel like, I'm interested to get your take on this. That this kind of like ultra fairness culture we have, and this suspicion about corporations treating people terribly is causing a lot of problems, because, like you said, it's incredibly expensive to get rid of somebody who's bad. And part of that reason is that there's so many T's to cross and I's to dot. And it's like, did you put them on a PIP? Did you give them 5 warnings? Did you document their performance? And in the end of the day, it's like, okay, I should have fired this person 6 months ago, but in order to, you know what I mean? And this kind of thing, it's just really, it's damaging to everybody. It's damaging to the employee who was on the PIP. It was like scared all the time. We couldn't figure out why they couldn't make it happen. It's damaging to the corporation, obviously, it's damaging to the team. I don't know. You have any thoughts about that? Like,
I think that it's kind of the classic, it's some variant of like innovator's dilemma, right? Where, you get a large enough legal team and HR team, and then you end up in the spot where they're not really looking at the risk holistically. Like, they're looking at it, they're kind of like trying to prevent any lawsuit, et cetera. And at some point it becomes counterproductive, right? Like, where one of my favorite early Bezos things was, and this is just like how insightful he was. He actually was upset that we did not have enough lawsuits against us on the hiring front, because he said it meant that we're not firing people fast enough, right?
Interesting.
And that's very like harsh, right? But the point is that you have to have these, like, I found most companies use some variant of like the old school I think GE was the one who invented it. Obviously I didn't work at GE, but this notion of like top grading and moving people through the system and stuff. And it's like when you're in that process, it always feels like this is such a shitty process. Like, you know, it's just like, how are you forcing me to get rid of this many people, et cetera? But I feel like it's kind of one of those things. It's almost like democracy, right? This is a terrible, shitty system, but it's better than all the other ones, right? And I think that's like you have to find some way to efficiently move, to kind of force people to like stack rank and continue to evolve and move the organizational up. Because I think, you know, the needs of organizations change. You're going to have to move through people. Some people will be able to adapt. Some people won't. And the people will change, right? Like they maybe they were effective 5 years ago, they're not now. Yeah. Maybe they'll be effective again 5 years from now, right? It's not a, but unfortunately, like firing is this incredibly traumatic event. Yeah. Getting fired, getting laid off, all that stuff that I'm sympathetic to, and you know, that's why it kind of gets so much press, right? That's why it gets so much push. But no, I kind of back to your original question though. I think, you know, at startups, the mantra is like fire fast, hire fast, fire fast, right? And that's because you do have to, you know, your kind of your tolerance level, because you're capital constrained, your tolerance level is so low on like, I don't have money. I can't have, like, everyone has to be pulling here, because otherwise, like, you've got this like thread, this little like needle to thread to get over the next hump, to get to your next round of funding. And so you have to find some way to be hyper efficient about that. And so it's like every little bit matters throughout the organization. If someone's not pulling their weight, you're not going to get there. And then I think on top of that, B players, they kind of drag the culture and the morale down, right? Like, and it's cancerous, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, like I think people are suited for different jobs and different levels of companies. And I don't think people should probably take that as personally. You know, it's like some people are, to be in a startup at an early stage, you kind of need to be more of a generalist. And as the company gets larger, people get more specialized. It's kind of like an economy, you know.
Well, it's true. Some people should take it personally. Yeah. There are definitely people you're like, look, you're just lazy.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah.
Take it personally.
Yeah, you know that's fair. That's fair.
Right.
Yeah,
sometimes it is you.
Yeah,
it's not us, it's you.
But it's like it's kind of like it's almost like it's like matching reality to expectations, right? And I just, that's always the challenge. It's not that person probably will not find a job somewhere, and it's not that there maybe is a job that requires less energy, et cetera, but this is not it. Yeah. And it's about finding that right. Like every time we have to let someone go, I'm not like, this will be your last job, right? It's like, they're going to find something else. They're going to learn something from it, or they're going to go find something that's a better match for how they think about the world. Right. So
totally. Yeah. I'm curious how much of it, like you've seen, how much is taught versus innate with like key talent that you've worked with, or even I'd be curious in terms of how your leadership style or brand or philosophy even evolved at Amazon? Because in some cases, it feels like it's like people either get it or they don't. But what did you see through your time there?
Yeah, I think it's like one of the harder things in hiring. I don't think there's like one one rule that you can follow. Because I've definitely seen the, like, you know, we're only hiring smart people. We don't care what you've done. We're gonna go down this road of like you're really smart. Go figure this out. You know, my little anecdote is like, I consider myself a smart person. I got into enterprise sales, right, by switching over to this mode, and I'm like, this is really fucking hard, right? And there's definitely a 10,000 hours thing associated with being a really good enterprise sales, and I'm like, you know, it doesn't really matter what I can do on the engineering side. You need to have experience with this and kind of know where the blind spots are and stuff, right? So I always feel I'm not arrogant enough to think that you just kind of hire smart people and they figure it out in general, you know. But on the other hand, for me, like, one of the big things that has worked really well cultural wise is just the willingness to grind, right? And I do, and that was like early Amazon. You know, it was like we were just all grinding, right? And I think you get into the startup world and you do have to find the people with the right experience, but the people that are working, whether they're a junior engineer who's getting through like a coding school and they came a more non-traditional way, her willingness to just grind it out and figure it out, that can be huge in that particular spot, as well as a 20-year veteran who's an enterprise seller. He better be willing to just like start cranking through this thing. And I think that's been a really important aspect of our culture that I'm very proud of. And then I think, what was the second question? You think?
Well, the second question on top of that, and now I'm going to edit it a little bit, is in terms of your personal leadership brand, how that evolved, and would you say, is there anything you wouldn't take from the Amazon culture as well?
I don't honestly think the Amazon culture fits. Amazon culture was developed after Amazon was kind of going already, right? And you have to be like. It's just, in my opinion, it's a very different thing. One thing people always say about big companies, they always say like, it's like a startup within a big company, right? Like you hear this, Paul's laughing, right? Like I know you always hear people say that, right? Because they're like, yeah, we're doing this, thing within, Google, and it's going to be this thing. And it's just like, the reality is it's not the same. Like there's a thing with, you get so much stuff from having, if I'm an Amazon and I release a new product, I'm going to get 1 billion page views off the bat. And, I think when we were first launched Shipium, like how many page views did we get this week? Which is it's not really our channel, so it doesn't matter, but it's like 5, or some like, like some crazy. And so, but you're just not going to get this, and you don't have access to the resources. You can't just, Bezos did what you do when you're a big company. You have like effectively unlimited capital. So you basically can throw, if I'm going to get into, movies, I'm going to throw like $1 billion at it and win at it because it's a huge TAM, and that's smart. Like you should do that. Like, but at a startup, it's all about like, you kind of got to be scrappy. And I do think, a lot of the Amazon hiring was more about specialization. Like we were hiring like, this is an economist who knows about this particular style of like deep learning and machine, and you like that guy is not going to do well in a startup environment. And so I think there's kind of that piece. Some of the innate aspects of Amazon's culture, though, I think translated pretty well. I think data first. I think that's been a big, like, Amazon, in my opinion, one of their biggest strengths was companies say like, we want to be data driven. Most companies aren't. When you really look at it, companies say they want to be customer focused. Most companies are not, in my opinion. And I think Amazon really leaned into like, we are going to everything, like we're going to do this objectively through data, and we are going to make sure that the customer is happy no matter what. And those two things, I think, pull forward a lot of stuff. But the kind of the mechanics and the aspects of it, I think, are very different and strange. You run things totally different in a large company versus a small company. It's just, I had a friend who kind of said something like, everything in startups is about what stage you're at. Like it totally dictates what you're doing and how you're hiring and how you're thinking about the company. And that's totally true. Like, you're not worried about like, here's my grand vision for what this could be 10 years ago. You're like, we gotta get some ink on paper. We gotta close these deals, right? Like that's what's going to get us to the next milestone.
That's really good insight. Yeah, everything's about what stage you're at.
Yeah,
I think this is. I hope somebody proves me wrong, but I think this is why people from Amazon, well, some other places as well, tend to do better making startups go than folks specifically from Microsoft.
Yeah,
and like I said, I hope somebody proves me wrong about this, but my observation of everybody who's trying to start a company coming out of Microsoft is they go, boom, we built this thing, here we go. And then it's like crickets.
Yeah.
And then there's no step 2, right? Because they don't understand why there's crickets. When they were at Microsoft, they said, we're going to reinvent the way that you know, reinvent, the way you interact with your mouse, whatever thing.
Yeah.
And it's part of Windows, and you can opt out. And they're like, look at our engagement. Right?
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then later on, it's like I started this and I wrote all this code, and I put my website up, and like nobody cares.
Yeah.
Why? And so you got to learn. You got to learn to test your assumptions, get to know your customers. Enterprise. You got enterprise sales.
Yeah.
Is hard. It's hard. And
it's really hard.
It doesn't really show up with an operating system update.
Yeah. No, I think the probably the higher margin the company is, the harder you're going to have in startup land, right? Like Microsoft was kind of the old Google, and it's like, then Google, like Microsoft had the greatest invention in the history of capitalism, and then Google came along and invented the slightly best invention of the history of capitalism, right? Like it's just hard to come from that to like, what I always liked about Amazon was it was just such a, like, we were just knife fight for years and years and years. You were trying to just get through this because there was kind of nothing. Retail is just a very, very low margin business. I remember like looking in 2008, we started looking at pricing data, and we started matching off of the internet. And that's when the phone combined with running these price matching algorithms, that's what ultimately kind of popped Amazon. That was one of the big factors, because now Amazon was totally like rich people who could afford to kind of buy on Amazon, and then around that point it started turning into more this discount concept came online, right? And that was that, but it reflects just how tight everything is, how tight margins are. You just have no room.
That is really interesting. I never thought about this before. I didn't remember being like, I'm going to buy some books on Amazon, right? Because I don't want to go to the bookstore, and they have a great selection, but it was like the premium product,
right? You
bought books on Amazon because your time was more valuable than your money.
Convenience and selection is what defined it in the 2000s.
Right. And I wasn't looking for like discount razors or whatever.
No.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Did you see that transition happen from the rich people online store to like everybody's?
I think the 2008 financial crisis helped Amazon a lot in that regard. I think it became, when money became pressured, it also was the phone, right? So like, you got to have the thing in the store so you can actually look at it to be, you can't be like, I'm going to drive home and see if this razor is cheaper on Amazon, right? I'm at Walmart, right? But those two things, the global financial crisis, like people became super price conscious, and you're looking for deals, and they had it offered up, and there you go, right? And then, Prime still remained premium, but that eventually became even like more or less like a, equivalent of like an HBO or something, like the coverage was a lot wider, kind of in the cable television ilk. But I think that was the switchover point. That was a huge shift. And that's why like houses in the Seattle area, like just like little blip on the, because Amazon did really well through that period comparatively.
When did you leave Amazon? What year?
2018. Yeah.
Were you there through the Seattle head tax debates and all that stuff, or not?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So can you tell us about, you were at B Square before, which was your first startup experience, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then you did 19 years at Amazon.
Yeah.
You said it started as a startup, so that's great, but at least the last, a decade of your experience are big, not a startup.
Yeah.
So then you go from, and never having raised venture capital before, right? So what is that process for you? What's the first thing you do? How does that go?
Yeah.
Who do you call?
I think you try to like leverage your resources. And I do think like it's a little bit, Amazon carries pretty good weight on the VCs kind of see it as an asset. So there's an advantage from that. It like definitely would have been a totally different experience for me raising money in 2002 as a kid, right? Versus kind of like now with all this like deep experience on these particular topics, et cetera. But, like interesting things. I thought, we used 6-pagers exclusively at Amazon. I actually think they're, as a management tool, I think it's interesting. I actually have thought like VC should look at that as a potential like way to try to vet companies. I've always thought that was
It's like the OKR thing.
What?
6-pagers and the OKRs.
Yeah. Well, just this notion of like make someone write down and explain what they're doing. Right. So when we would meet, you know, I actually think in some cases it, like everything else, it got kind of perverted over time where you end up with this, like everyone's writing them, no one's reading them. It's like, it's kind of just garbage in, garbage out. But the original version of that was like a really powerful tool to force you to actually explain what you were trying to do. And kind of a genius thing on Bezos's part, especially for him to be able to kind of scale and evaluate the stuff. But anyway, where I was going with that is I then had this like atrophied muscle around pitching, right? Yeah. Because we weren't doing it.
Slide deck, right?
Yeah, like a deck, creating a deck, pitching a deck, going through it. And there's something like very inherently different around, like I think, you know, we would do like, you know, fireside chats or whatever at Amazon, or I did all hands and I'd kind of just talk through stuff. And it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like, and this is very comfortable and it's easy to kind of answer questions and go back and forth. There's something totally different though, like of just standing up and just like pitching, right? You just feel weird, right? It's a very weird, it's one way. It was kind of even worse as we went later because the Zoom thing, I tend to kind of like to read people's faces. And when you're on Zoom, you can't even really do that because, you know, they're looking at something else, et cetera. And so
Zoom is the worst.
It is. I hate Zoom.
I don't know. Like I think we as a community have to stop insisting that that's the only way to pitch.
Yeah.
Because the number of times you're trying to pitch and you can tell the person is looking at something else.
Yeah.
And I literally just want to hang up. You know what I mean?
Well, we've started doing, I was saying earlier that I was out talking to some customers and potential customers last week, right? But I found that it's so much more effective to be in the room with them because you kind of like force them to look at what you're doing, and then, you know, they can tell you to screw off, but it's like at least you're kind of getting that answer as opposed to just like I'm on Zoom doing something else, right? Not really listening and saying, yeah, that's super interesting. And then it just kind of goes nowhere, kind of screwed. But
VCs are the worst at this.
Yeah.
Like, let's continue the conversation. It's like next step in this conversation is a term sheet or no. Right?
Yeah.
Like, come on, you know?
Yeah. I think it's like the best analogy I've heard is it's kind of like dating, right? You know, where there's no reason, they have no motivation to like not keep their options open. Right. So you're just, you know, if it moves in a different direction, why am I going to kind of shut down that conversation? But to me specifically though, I couldn't pitch. And so I had to do a lot of like reps on that and try to get better at how do you get through it. And I think my experience allowed me to kind of muddle through the first time. I think by the time we kind of raised our next round, I had worked some kinks out. But now that I'm doing so many sales things related, right? Like it's. I mean, I might as well be hawking like fake Rolexes out of the back of my car at this point. So
how much does selling help with pitching?
What?
How much does enterprise selling help with pitching?
I feel like it's really similar. I think that whole thing. You got to tell. The higher up you're selling to an enterprise, you're trying to tell a holistic story, and so it's a lot of the similar things. I think there's a grind aspect to both pitching and enterprise selling, which is like you have to like the process for me at least, and I kind of. From my friends and stuff, I kind of get the same thing. You write out what you think is going to go, and then you go pitch it, and it sounds like total garbage, right? Like it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's disjointed. For some reason, being on paper, it was going to make sense, but then you do it, and it's just like blank stares. And so, a lot of like what we try to do with the sales team, and what I'm big on is it's like reps, right? You just got to have like reps. That's why I actually think. Former athletes can end up being really good salespeople because they're so used to like, you know, you can find someone who's hit the like, like, you know, been with their pitching coach for 50 zillion pitches or whatever it is you do, like that helps. And that like 10,000 hours in the reps matters a lot.
This is really interesting because it sounds more like, you know about this, it sounds more like music performance than some kind of technical business thing. Right?
I agree.
It's really like
it's storytelling.
Yeah.
Storytelling. But you've got to be on stage for 20 shows before you stop.
For sure.
Stop getting
Sweating
stage fright and sucking and like blowing your voice out in the first two songs. You know, all of that,
you know,
right?
it's like, how are you explaining if you do have a good, obviously, like I'm also big on, there's also a lot of like, the problem is there's a lot of like, I don't really have a real product and I'm pitching it or I don't have a great idea and I'm pitching it anyway. And I think that, you know, obviously like there has to be a little bit of both, right? Like you can't, in early stage, it's an idea and a dream and all that stuff. So maybe less so, but there's always like a little bit of tension there around, you know, you're like, well, I guess like the WeWork guy was a great pitcher, but you know, he was just hawking real estate basically. Yeah. But you know, so I think you have tension around that. But at the end of the day, you have to find a way. These guys are like totally overloaded with people coming in and putting, you know, ideas and crap in their face, right? And you've got to find a way to like make your point quickly,
right? And
that is hard to do. It's exactly what you said. It's like a music performance.
This is how you know. That's a good point. You made a great point about WeWork, because it is the skill of pitching may be completely separate from the skill of running a business.
Right.
If you want to prove that to yourself, go read. You can. It's off their website now, but you can find it on the Wayback Machine. The Sequoia Capital's blog about when they met Sam Bankman-Fried and the like complete effusive, like kneeling at the feet of awesome, you know, capitalism. And they're going on. And then there's a point in this description where they realize that while he's in the room with them, he's playing a video game. And they just like fall all over themselves to like fawn on this guy. Like, can you believe how great he is? Right. And you know, as we know, it like turned out to be a total scam in the end. But they were blown away. They thought it was like the second coming. They really they envisioned that he was going to take over every money transfer in the Western economy. Entirely based on his ability to pitch. Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. No, I think it's kind of one of those things. I do think it does feel like there's probably some, it does feel like the VC process probably needs a little bit of like innovation, you know. I'm sympathetic to the fact that there's like a, you know, it's not, it is one of those things where it's like I said the before with like, it's like democracy, right? Like everyone hates it, but no one can come up with a kind of a better way to do it. And right now it's like, you know, power law, throw 10 ideas at the wall, etc. But I don't know. But it does feel like there's kind of something inherently inefficient about it where it's like you could get to the bottom of these things earlier. And right now it's the earlier stage it is, the more arty it is, right? It's kind of this weird thing.
Well, you must have seen them invest in competitors and you're like, why would you invest?
Yeah.
What are you doing? You know, it's just like mystery, right?
Yeah. It is. I mean, that's I think there's always that FOMO if you're in this circuit, right? Like you're just like, why are they like, what are they doing to get that kind of money, right? Well, I mean, even, you know, the WeWork guy went back and got more money, right? And you're like, I mean, how does that, and at some point you almost like kind of respect the game, right? You're like, what is he saying that I'm not saying? Why am I so bad at this, right? Like, what's
my real business for some reason?
Right. So it's kind of amazing. There's definitely a skill to it. And I think that whole thing is true. So
that's so interesting. So when so 2018, Amazon, so you obviously been thinking about spinning out for, I'm assuming, a little bit of time, but what was the actual process to say, okay, I'm going to do this. Here's who I'm going to do it with.
I did some like, I was kind of just like trying things in 2018 because I really honestly did not know what I was going to do. And so I talked to this woman that I had worked with in Amazon. She was kind of working on a project and she introduced me to a couple people and we were kind of playing around with stuff that was more in the freight space, I would say. Like it was a little bit, and it was honestly just because I just had to kind of go into like, I'm going to just try things mode. Right. And I learned some things from her and how she was kind of approaching things, but I also kind of realized like, I got to kind of find some, I gotta keep hammering on like, what's the differentiation? And I think when we saw it, it was really just, you start to kind of see like, okay, I'm in the classic, like I have this very, very unique perspective on how logistics and e-commerce work together. No one's building this. I got to go after this, right? And it kind of became clear. And so I actually, my co-founder, I reached out to him, and he was at Zulily at the time, but this was a guy that I met at Amazon in 1999. We like started within 2 days of together, and we were like in the same little office area, right? And we've kind of been, friends over the years, and he ended up kind of acting as technology and product, and I took over the business side. I think it was a good fit for, like, I'm more willing to basically fail it a bunch of times, right? Which is why I did sales, right? So I'm like, let me see how this works, right? Go the thing. But
you guys started together?
We started together, yeah. So I got
Zulily.
Yeah, he was at Zulily. When I approached him kind of about the concept, but
yeah, they were doing well at the time.
At the time, they were doing pretty well. Yeah,
now owned by Marcus Lemonis, right?
Yeah,
shout out to the prophet.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, though they had I think Zulily was really kind of a cool startup in the 2010s, and they were, to some degree, they're almost like a precursor to what you'd call like Shein now, which is this super cheap, takes a long time, super cheap. But then they got bought by QVC, and that apparently was, I wasn't there obviously, but it was apparently just like this total culture class, right?
Like a startup within a big company.
Yeah, right. There we go. Yeah, right. Yeah, but so they just couldn't. QVC was. It was, the idea was, it's like curation and like act more activity based shopping was the concept. So you could make the story work, but in practice, it's like super big old company with a demographic that was like older, and then this new kind of upstart thing, and it was just this total culture clash. And then I think they ended up spinning it off or something, but it's kind of dying on the vine as far. And then this guy bought it, right, which is funny. I love the distressed asset business. Like the whole Bed Bath and Beyond thing recently. And
there are people who are good at it.
Yeah, they are. Yeah,
they can find the value and cleave off the rest of the garbage.
Exactly.
That's you got to have respect for that.
Yeah, it's like that Secession show on Max, which was entertaining, right?
So you knew this guy from before.
Yeah.
And you guys got together. You had left, and was he still employed?
I think he was technically still employed, but we didn't go out until he had some time away from, like, basically we ideated at night about what this would look like, and then we actually then he decided, okay, I'm ready to, let's go. I think we're ready to start doing this. He left, and then we kind of went out and started pitching.
One thing I just really hate is when co-founders decide they're going to keep their jobs until they get funded.
Yeah, such a red flag. I think, but I mean, that's like the thing. There's so many different models. There's like the people that do the bootstrapping and stuff, right? And I was of the I'm like, I've done well at Amazon. I have limited time left on this earth. I want to make this happen as fast as possible. So I'm all about the like give me some capital and let's go. Let's get this going, right? I think there's definitely like people that go the other route. They're like, I'm trying to build a $50 million company that I own 100% of it, right? And it's like a different. I'm not good at that. I want I want to move as fast as possible. I mean, I find like, one of the more frustrating things about startups is you have limited capital, and you have like, there's just hurdles that take time to get you to these next stages. In our case, it's like, we really needed to have we need to have a partnership with these large carriers. They have these official partnerships where you have to be kind of accredited and that process just takes a year, right? It's just like, you just can't make it go faster. And so there's these blocks, but that's what I find the most frustrating is I'm just like, I can see it now. How do we just move faster? Right. And that's a tough thing. But anyway,
once you get through those though, right, you're through the gate.
I think we're doing great. And I think that's what you got to do. You got to like work on the product market fit, and then figure out what your go to market is, and you get your kind of partnership ecosystem lined up, and that takes time and stuff. I was more comparing it to like if you're doing the kind of more the bootstrap thing, that would just be like working in this like everyone's taking a reduced salary. Some people have other jobs. Like you're hiring people purely based on commission without, so they're not totally in on your mission, right? That stuff just it works for some people though. There's definitely a group of founders that like to go that route.
I guess what I meant is this gate to get through. We're a accredited provider is a pain in the butt, but then when you get through it, anybody coming up behind you now is going to hit that oil slick,
That's right. Yeah, and that's all that stuff, the moat of installations. We have a big moat around I think we ran like 50 million shipments through the platform last year, and I think we needed probably 20 million to start making the data come, like basically so we can start training these transit models and stuff to get to that point. And now we're kind of getting to the point that you're starting to get this moat. Like it's obviously some of it is like how you build the model, but the other part is just data into the model. Every one of those steps simplifies ingestion of new customers and whatnot. And those are like classic SaaS moats that you're trying to create as you go down this thing. I think data science data leverage is a huge one for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you and what's your co-founder's name?
Mac is his name. Yeah.
Mac?
Yeah.
Okay. You and Mac. And then you talked to this Amazon lady who you knew.
Yeah.
And you said, hey, I'm going to go start raising money.
Yeah.
What happens next?
So we got wired into Pioneer Square Labs, and Julie kind of knew. Julie was kind of our main proponent at that point in time, and we talked to a couple other kind of Bay Area type startups, but I think we were trying to raise a couple million just to get it going, and so basically enough to hire a couple engineers, probably someone to help me be pushing on like a business generalist. That was the rough business plan. And so raised a couple $1 million, and kind of that got us to our first customer, basically.
Mm-hmm.
What was the process to understand the product or the MVP?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I will say it's a weird story, because the initial thought of the business was we were going to focus on, I would say, like the delivery promise angle of the problem, right? So we were going to push on transparency to the end customer, and kind of like you're always looking, as I'm sure you're like looking for a wedge or a way to get in. So the first 3 or 4 months of the company, it was like late 2019. Right. So the first 3 or 4 months of were like, I'm calling everyone. I'm calling anyone I can, like, that will talk to me on the phone, and being like, how would this affect you? And, you figure some things out, like, okay, the company's too small. They don't really give a shit about this. They're really like, don't really start caring until they get a little larger.
How do you even find them though? How do you get this like customer list?
Oh, I think you use LinkedIn network. Like LinkedIn's a great tool. I'm always on there. I love LinkedIn. But you ask like people in the VC world for connections. Mm-hmm. You ask your friends, you call in favors, like all that kind of stuff. And I think people are usually pretty good about, there's one thing, now we're running like a more formal sales process where you kind of know you're selling to people. And that's one thing. Yeah. Early days, people will usually take like a 30-minute interview, right? Where I just like, let me just talk to you about where your pain points are. And I actually think for like early stage founders, that's one of the more important things. Like whenever they ask me, what do you do? I'm like, start calling people. Like you just figure out what they're saying, right? Like, what are they worried about? What do they even care about? Because you're going to start to see patterns. So we were kind of moving along, and then like the pandemic happens, right? And this like March, everything starts falling apart. And the weird thing is that for MySpace, e-commerce obviously blew up, but from the day-to-day, like we didn't have a vetted product at that point, and the day-to-day thing was no one would talk to me, right? So it was because they were so busy just trying to keep their like company from falling apart from the amount of like volume coming through the system. Everything was just breaking, right? So I did find a couple. So we kind of decided to, I wouldn't call it a pivot, but we decided to kind of focus more on stuff that was more cost savings oriented. And, I was able to get kind of a couple, there was one guy, our first customer was this company called Grove Collaborative. And I had worked with this guy, the guy that was kind of running their ops at the time. And he was just like, we are just getting murdered by this shipping part, right? And in Amazon, we had a like pretty built out system that understood like transit times of all the different carriers, and then it would pick and choose based on kind of like what was happening with the outer environment and what things cost and whatnot. But he was just like, I just need one that will basically work. I will pay you. I will sign a contract with you if you can give me one that will just work, right? And that was kind of like, I'm like, okay, we have something to build. Like, let's shift all of engineering towards this. All hands on deck. We kind of keep pushing on this, and I think we launched it like, I think when it was all said and done, I think we launched like maybe February or March of the next year with this first product, and it was just very rudimentary. But it, Mac's a great engineer. We have good engineers at the company in terms of just like, it's all linearly scaled and everything's set up such that it's not going to, we have all these, you have all these building blocks. We have MongoDB and all the, these different pieces that you can build from. And if you know how to do that, you can build a high reliability scale system fairly cheaply. And that was kind of our first product. And it kind of was just like, it just works. Right. And then, I think we were still in the pandemic and we were able to close a couple more deals, based on almost a combination of, it was this shipping engine on the back half, and then a little more focus on kind of delivery promise and transparency on the front end, and closed a couple more deals through 2021, I guess. And then we ended up raising, we raised kind of a middle round, to basically just to kind of keep things, I would call it like a between seed and A, because we basically didn't have enough money. We weren't at the marker for A at the time was like, you got to be at $1 million in ARR, whatever it is. And I think we were like, we had maybe signatures up to 400,000, but something like that. I don't remember, but we raised kind of this intermediate round with a local firm called Trilogy. Mm-hmm. And then we ended up, then I was able to like sign a couple contracts with Saks Off Fifth and a couple of these bigger retailers, and that led to the A in early 2022. So cool. Yeah, it was kind of grinding through it. So
that first customer was who? What were they called?
They were called Grove Collaborative, and so they're like a subscription, GROVE, and they're like a subscription, like kind of organic wellness products, right? So they sell like, I would say like Myers hand soap, right? Like high end kind of organic-y. They have a private label thing that they're pushing, which is their own products. But it's kind of like organic cleaning and like body wash type products, right? Like so not food, but yeah.
You got a hold of this guy.
Yeah.
So you knew him from before.
Yeah.
And you got him on the phone, and did you go pitch him in person, or it was just, you said this?
I did go down before the pandemic and I had kind of formally interviewed him. It's down in San Francisco. It's kind of like, and
just you by yourself.
I went down there, like formally interviewed him on what his challenges and pain points were. And so I had that as a bit of a thing to armed with it, but it all like totally once the pandemic happened, their volume blew up and all those pain points got exaggerated, I guess. But, they got much worse. And so he was trying to, he was like, yeah, I will totally buy this from you if you can solve this problem for me. And so that's, we did not go down and pitch him during the pandemic because I was like really hard to actually. They had all gone remote. Sure. I think he had removed. He was like living in San Francisco when I first talked to him, but they had moved back to like remote Washington or something. Kind of like it was. No one was pitching in person anywhere, right? And that was kind of the at least in that time frame, that late 2020.
So you've got an idea for a product, you've got this customer interview, customers bought in, said, I will pay you for this.
Yeah.
Now comes maybe the most difficult part other than execution. how much does it cost?
Yeah.
How did you figure this out? How does that?
I tried to find, I think, enterprise sales and SaaS in general, a lot of it, like what I've learned, I'll skip ahead, is a lot of it is like about going to be driven by what budget people have, right? And so you got to work off of that. I think like pricing for a business deal, there's obviously like all the product led growth stuff, which I think is interesting, and people have had success. But once you get past like probably about a 30,000 or so, it's all kind of negotiated, right? So a lot of it comes from what people actually budget and push. What I did was I reached out to a bunch of people that I knew were kind of COOs at companies and tried to ask them what they paid previously for similar-ish type products, and got an idea of kind of where's the price point land. I think I wasn't too far off for that one piece. I think one of the interesting things is if you went through 2023 as a SaaS provider, everything got way more tight, right? So I actually think it was kind of almost easier in 2022 to sell that. I mean, 2021 to sell at more of a rational price than it is now. Mm-hmm. But we also tried to triangulate around kind of these like things like 10 to 1 value. Like if we're saving you $1 million, then the product's probably worth 100,000. They say like you get 10% of value if it's a commodity. It's probably 20 to 30% if it's a very, not hard to buy against, et cetera. So we used a couple of those kind of like triangulation pieces to come in.
Oh, that's good. Where did you learn that?
I think it was, I just tried to read everything I could find on like SaaS pricing and whatnot. But I think there's kind of these rules of thumbs that have emerged. You can find people that are somewhat experts on this. And it's like ends up being relationships through the VC community, et cetera. They're never like exact. And I think some of the trickiness, there was a guy in PSL that was explaining this to me, and he's basically saying like the challenge is often that people's perception of value is where these types of models break down, right? So like your perception is I'm saving you $1 million. Their perception is you're not saving, you're saving me $500, right? Whatever it is. And you've got to even our latest sales cycles and our enterprise sales cycles, we're very big on, we actually have the simulator product, right? Which is good for scenario planning. If you're in retail, like what happens if I add another fulfillment center? What does it do to customer click to ship time, or what is it going to do to my cost structure, or blah, 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 right? But this was kind of originally used as a sales product, because I'm like, if you don't believe how much I can sell you, we will literally take your orders from a year ago, from the last year, and pump this through the system and tell you what it'll cost, right? And so that kind of stuff, like that's where you start to build a very credible sales organization, where you've got like, you want to be cutting off these kind of like, take that off the table. No, you're going to save a bunch of money. That's off the table. Like, you don't have to worry about security. That's off the table. Right. And I was actually, one of the things I was talking about with my sales guy the other day is it's funny how like people at Amazon, we used to always talk about this thing called cognitive load, right? Which is this concept of like, people have, when they go to make a buying decision, they have like limited cycles that they can actually spend on like making that decision. And if you introduce some decision point, then it's going to like block the buy, right? And so the first thing was we're going to always be as low as anyone else on the internet, right? So after my time running the supply chain, I actually ran this group called Retail Systems, and I had the pricing team, right? For this was maybe a couple years, and I had this like combination of this massive set of auditors in India. I think the total team size was like 8,000 people when you all added it up. But so there's this, they were kind of doing mixed things and back office stuff, but there was this huge group that was like just scraping the internet. And then we were kind of like using them to train these machine learning algorithms to get better and better pricing. But, that was like the full manifestation of this thing. But your point is like, you want to be spot on in price, so that anybody that goes to Amazon, they never think twice. They're like, I'm getting the best price. I don't need to go double check and look around the internet. I'm going to get the best price, right? But then the second thing, which Prime kind of solved, was I'm going to get it fast, right? And so you take that off the table as even consideration. And then I think the third, but that kind of like removing cognitive load is this huge thing. And when I look at these enterprise sales things, part of it is you're just trying to like get like anything that the person's worried about, you want to just take off the table so that they're going to purely buy on differentiation and value. And that's, kind of the process. So
the simulator, whose idea was that? Or how did
I think we had things like that at Amazon. I think it kind of evolved as a priority as part of this sales pitch, and then it kind of became like when you're doing these sales things, you're kind of asking people like, what would you like? What do you need? Right. And I think this kind of trade-off and this notion of needing to be able to effectively build a business case for things that they're trying to accomplish in their org just kept popping up. And so then it kind of ended up bubbling up as a
I think this is where
priority.
Companies fall apart, really, is when they don't know how to go do sales engineering, let's call it, right? Like, I need a way to show my product in your environment, and I need to get some engineering involved in doing this,
Yeah.
And you have, I think, a pretty unique background because you know both sides, and a lot of people don't. You may not even realize that, but the way that you navigated that, I think, may be pretty unique.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh,
yeah. Consumption's like a hard thing in SaaS, and so is like that integration bandwidth. And I had this whole, like, one of the weirder use cases I saw in 23 was after all the layoffs. So all these like retailers laid people off, it blew up roadmaps, right? So we would go, like, we sent an engineer to go. We're like, fine, we'll give you an engineer. Like, we'll help you map out how this product's going to fit into your organization. Because we were having, like, it was, you're trying to, once you close the contract, you're trying to like get them to install it because that makes it sticky. And obviously you want to get the value out, and they're comfortable paying because they see the value. It's all positive, right? But like, we're looking at the comparison and we're like, wait, so in the product roadmap, you're doing like 3D modeled versions of men's t-shirts is being traded off with installing our software. Like, how the fuck did that happen? What? And the guy was saying, like, he got handed all this crap from, like, they laid a bunch of people off and like a bunch of the stuff moves over. Right. And so, this is all the thing of like when you're selling into these organizations, you got to like figure out ways to knock those things down. And I love that, like, with that sales team, just figuring out ways to like, how do we do this? What do we do? Who can we work with? And, I think that's how we ended up pushing on partner stuff. Like we have a really strong emphasis in Shipium on getting these really strong partner relationships, because they're the ones that kind of, you get with that, you can kind of do like a pre-built connector and stuff, and all those kinds of things help. So
I think it's very interesting to me about how these enterprise, particularly the enterprise stuff, because we run into this all the time where people go, well, I don't understand why that's even a product. These people just need to talk to these people and it should be fine, right? Yeah. And what you don't understand is, at scale, those people don't even know each other, right? Yeah. In fact, they might hate each other. Yeah. So you may want to have somebody else who can observe the data that they're each getting. There's like all of this stuff that happens. Yeah. And I think we don't give enough. I think startup founders don't give enough credit to the opportunities that are sitting right there. Yeah. And in fact, a lot of these enterprises don't even realize the holes in them. Yeah. So they just like, it's still, Yeah. So I think it's pretty amazing how you figured this out,
I think it's a lot of, I'm cleaning it up, but it was, it's a lot of like banging your head against the wall, right? Yeah. Obviously, I'm sure with most startups, right? You have a lot of painful, painful days and nights trying to like sort through how to actually make this thing go, right?
Yeah. Well, so I'm curious to pivot a little bit. Tell me about, how's it been building out the team? So where are you at now? How you kind of bring in some of those?
I think we're at about 60 employees. One of the interesting things was the like, remote, non-remote. Yes. And our particular story. So I slubbed to the office for 20 years at Amazon, and before that even. And like, I was all about like, I'd be like, I have a doctor's appointment Thursday morning, 3 weeks from now, so I'll be 2 hours late to the office, right? Which just sounds bizarre in today's world, right? Like people just kind of like coming and going, like, so I won't be in the office for those hours. But I think we got a little office like when we started, and then but immediately the pandemic happens. We all kind of like, everyone goes home and we start working from home. My personal experience was like, I hated it at first. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is amazing. I don't have to like drive to work every day. But then I started hating it again. I was kind of like,
I think it's
kind of like this.
Classic.
Yeah. Now I'm just like, whatever I'm doing currently, I hate the current thing and want the other thing. And so now I just flip flop. But we had our kind of most senior engineer, his kid was, I think he had family back in Ohio, and he's like, well, we're all at home, so I'm moving back to Ohio. So like, we're like, all right, well, I guess there's no reason. So anyway, you just kind of become this de facto remote company, and then hiring is really tough. So you kind of like going through this hiring thing. But we actually just got a newer, bigger office space recently. And so I think we're kind of looking at starting to bring some people back. My observation is like product management, they probably need to be in the office more often. And so we're kind of going the route of more, bifurcating on job function, because engineers just do not want to be in the office. Like and I kind of get it, like it's like a little bit of, if you're just trying to like, they're basically the organization, if you have an efficient way of kind of like making sure that people are performing and things are getting done, it's like, it adds a lot of weight to try to bring them into the office all day so they can just sit in front of the computer on their headphones, right? So I get it. And so we've kind of given some leeway on that front. But I've also ended up hiring a bunch of people on the sales side as we iterated through who was going to work. I hired a bunch of people out of this company called Project 44, which was out of Chicago, right? And so I have this like little kind of mini hub of a lot of the go-to-market is happening out of there. And so I think we'll end up with kind of two offices, probably one in Seattle and one in Chicago. So it's kind of a cool, cool setup. But the point is that navigating remote work has been really interesting. It's been kind of I'd like to move away from it, but I feel like form of it is going to be here forever, right? Yes. Like hybrid, like at least 2 or 3 day a week thing, that's not going away, in my opinion. Like it's kind of the last gift of the pandemic, in my opinion. I mean,
some companies, I don't know what they were thinking about. They went so hard one way and so hard the other way that they like set themselves up.
Yeah.
I think Facebook did this where they were like, you can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, right on, I'm off to, I'm going to go live in Tokyo for a year.
Yeah. Right.
And then they're like, actually, you got to come back to the office.
Wait a minute.
Right? It's those hard swings that are just going to, it's so weird because it was like, it's almost like our hiring practices are the current thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. I think like, Amazon, I was obviously not there, but I think they were kind of like, you need to be near here, but people just moved anyway. And they went with the like, we're going to bring everyone back. I'm kind of sympathetic to, I feel like once a company gets to a certain size, it would be really hard to try to run remotely. Cause I just like, everybody has the friend in the Seattle area that works for Microsoft that you like, they'll like call you at 2 o'clock on Thursday and they're like, hey, what are you doing? I'm playing golf or something. And you're like, aren't you supposed to be working? Yeah. I'm just doing my meetings from the golf course, right? Whatever it is, like whatever it is, right? So there's obviously, so there's something about, like forcing people to like come in that if you're like halfway in, halfway out, and it's a super big company, I think it's just really hard to like, there's going to be a bunch of people that will probably do more work if you kind of make them go into the office. And so I just feel, I feel like it's very like, you have to kind of look at the specific circumstances to kind of understand what the company is. But there's probably some truths on both sides, and it kind of, the answer is probably like kind of lives in the middle. So
yeah. How do you feel like it's been being able to, circling back to the earlier question about how it worked at Amazon, how's it worked for you to disseminate culture?
We do a lot of things that are more, we do like a monthly all hands. And it's obviously like on Zoom and stuff. And I try to like, the important things for me in this stage of company is I want everyone to feel like we're on the same mission. I want people to feel inspired by what we're trying to accomplish. And I want them to feel like when we get a win, when we sign a contract, like if we're doing well on sales and the way that these companies work, engineering is going to be under a lot of pressure, right? And I think having that connection to the larger mission is what pulls the whole thing. And what I've kind of found an interesting challenge is just different things working at different stages and trying to get them all going, right? If your sales engine is working, then it feeds marketing and it also feeds what's happening in product. But when there's a piece that's kind of out of sync, the whole thing kind of like stops, right? And we, so we've been like, a lot of my focus on the sales side has been all about like more repeatability than about actually like total contract value, because repeatability is what leads to kind of like, I can now build, I have an engine that if I put gas in it, the car is going to go. Like, I just need to put more gas in it, right? Like, so I need to figure out how to make sure that engine is repeatable and running. And I think, but to your point on culture, I think we're small enough that it ends up just being mostly about dissemination between myself and my co-founder and making sure that people hear what the message and the mission is, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think we're quite at the stage that it's like, we're thinking about, I guess, North Star type stuff. I think the companies, our goal is to like, just kind of, as a company, is to fundamentally change the way shipping is, performed effectively outside of Amazon. And that has been largely true for a long time. And I think people kind of get that, but I think where people need, it's more about like the day-to-day culture that we're trying to, the grind that I was talking about. Like, I want everyone here to be committed to what we're doing, because it's going to be hard, right? It's like, we know it's going to be hard.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you, I want to go back to this VC pitching thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's super fascinating to see how people get introduced to this.
Yeah.
Your first pitch, who was your first pitch with about shipping? Do you remember?
I think my first official pitch probably, God, I don't even know. I think I had talked to a couple, I got
like friends
and stuff like that. That was kind of, and I talked to kind of some smaller VCs that had run through that. I think, the PSL was pretty early, and they were kind of like of the mindset of I would almost say like the first round went pretty smoothly because it was entirely carried on. I could kind of say whatever, and it was just like, oh, you're an Amazon VP. You've got the skill. And so it was probably like, that was a lot of what people were just kind of like, yeah, here's some money, go have fun.
But how did you know what even goes into a pitch deck? If you've never seen one before, you had seen a slide deck.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah. I hadn't installed PowerPoint on my computer. Exactly. Right. Yeah. Like, I don't even. Right. Yeah. I mean, you play with it. Yeah. Right. Can we just do it with Giphy? Yeah. You kind of, I mean, I remember just like going through some standard ones, and then you, like I said, you kind of try to do it and it doesn't come out. I thought actually when I got into the second one, where we had gotten to a first contract, but we need some more money to kind of keep the thing going, because there had been a couple pivots, and that was the one where I felt like it started to get, that was kind of the most painful one, right? And that was because then I was calling out to a lot of kind of random VCs. I was getting a lot of no's, right? Because people were, it was not enough that they needed to see some like, where's the business going, where it's heading, right? It was kind of that tweener weird stage. And I did a lot of, that was definitely the time that I probably did 50 pitches. And, you asked 50 50, pretty ladies to dance, and they all say no, right? And so you're looking for the one, and that was the painful one, and that was kind of where you got. We tried. I kept like changing how I was pitching. I kept like repping what I was trying to say, but honestly, the problem is you start to get in your own head,
Totally.
right? And you get this weird I'm being kind of real here, but you get this you're just like you can't even. I just remember almost like freezing. You'd be going, and then you'd kind of hear yourself, and you're like, am I really here? What am I doing here? What's the, but you start to get stuck, and then everyone's giving you feedback, and then you've now lost the ability to, I would sound better if I just would have gone in with nothing and just kind of talked about this. Right. And I think the trick is to make it efficient, fast, but also sound natural. And it takes some, it's a little bit of for me, that was a really big kind of crucible moment for me personally, where I'm trying to figure out, how do I get myself to this, how do I kind of grow in this way in the timeline that the company needs, right? And I think you just kind of work through it, and I think we got enough to get to the point that we were offered, whatever it was, $8 million to kind of keep the thing going, and we could expand a little bit and start hitting this thing. But then after getting through that, by the time we did the A round, I had kind of found my groove, right? I kind of got how it was framed in my head, how I organize my thoughts. People do different, I have this, one of my original business hires. He's like this, I think, he grew up in on a farm in Wisconsin, and he said, basically he was always at Sunday school. And so he could just look at these texts and then just kind of recite back exactly what was written, because he had to do that so many times as a kid. Right. And that was how he organized his thoughts. He would literally write a script and then just kind of spew it out. Right. And I just I can't remember the script. Maybe it's too many drugs or something in my youth, but whatever it is, but I'm just kidding. But the point is that it was this, I need, if I do it in that form, or even if I try to read it over Zoom, it sounds mechanical, and it's not working. They're not getting the message. And so, a lot of it for me was now when I go into a pitch, I'm actually super high level, one word, hit this topic, hit this topic, hit this topic, hit this topic, and then you fill in the rest.
Right.
And then you kind of rep those talks. And I think it tends, so when we go into a sales call and they want me to kind of come over the top as the CEO to try to make a point, I, usually the way that I communicate with my sales guy is he's make sure you hit this. I write that down, and that's what the pitch consists of, right? And that's the framing that kind of works for me. But you just have to put in the hours, and you don't kind of have the hours in the early stages necessarily. Yeah.
Well, your comment's interesting about how much do you trust yourself versus trust others?
Yeah.
Your intuition. You're hey, I'm starting this thing. I've seen something unique that no one else has.
Yeah.
And how much to take in and listen, because you're going to get all these voices and advice, customers, VCs, whatever. And so that's I appreciate you sharing that.
Did you feel I always feel you get too much help on your pitch. Everybody's got, right? And if you listen to that advice, you lose what you were trying to say.
Yeah.
It's so much oh, you need to talk about how AI is going to transform, the shipping industry. And you're I could maybe tell that story, but that's not really what we're doing or whatever, And it's so much about the current, it's always the current thing. So it's tie your thing to crypto, right? How are you going to use crypto to transform the shipping industry for better the world, right? It's so much of that stuff is just, but I don't know. Did you have to, how did you take, what Sarah's saying on trust, how did you figure out
I feel there's this story from the 70s where Folgers coffee, they kept doing these A/B tests on what was working and what was not working, and then they kept making these micro adjustments, and then 10 years later, everyone hated the coffee, right? Something. So I'm not getting the thing right, but it's some story of you keep adjusting, and so just go back to the original recipe, right? But I think you like, I think you're right. I think it kind of ends up watering down, and you keep playing with these concepts and it gets too complicated or too simple, or, and yeah, to some degree, I think some of it is like, just, that's the process. And part of the process is like, you throw the whole thing out and start again. And, I think, like the decision on, the other thing I think is funny when you're asking people advice is like, you'll give the same pitch to people and they'll give you like exact opposite. Yeah. Right. And you're like, I guess I equally trust these two people, right, but they have this totally different perception. But to me, it's like collecting information, and you're trying to get feedback on it and kind of figure out what's gonna actually hit it. And then again, like going live is when you actually learn what you're doing, right? Like that's when you actually figure out whether this is going to work or not. How
do you balance pitching high level, eventual North Star kind of goals versus traction today?
Nightmare, total nightmare of like that's like, you hit the nail on the head. It's like this. I think when you go into a VC, like, they're looking for TAM as part of it. So you can have a really good idea that's working really well now, that there's only 4 people in the world that are going to buy, right? So it doesn't really matter. And where there's some like limited scope of who's going to care. And then the other side is like, you've got this massive TAM, with all this potential upside, but you have no way to kind of attack it, right? And I actually think a lot of the problems in the last 10 years in the retrospect is that it's too much of the latter one. I think Amazon kind of ruined a lot of the VC thing because, they're like, real estate, that's like a $5 trillion business. If I only get 1% of real estate, it's going to be, do the math, right? And, so I think that was always my challenge, because I think we had a pretty good, like really good idea on how this worked, but people are kind of like, what are you going to attack? Right. And, even stuff like when we opened and I was talking about how like this kind of software only approach to things, I don't think that was really totally clear in my head at the time. Right. Like it was like, yeah, we'll do this now as software, but maybe we'll eventually kind of move to this other things. But that, and that's like the reps and the thing that where you've got to kind of work out what's your, like, let the thing come out that's really working or not working. But I think VCs, what they're trying to do is just, they're trying to like use both ends of that spectrum to say like, does the story make sense? And then do I have data to back it up? And if neither of those are true, you probably don't have a long-term business.
Sure.
But definitely a lot of people lost their way around like revenue versus feasibility of a business, right? This whole like I can buy my way into whoever came up with like hyperscaling, I think like ruined it for everyone else. Ruined it forever. Like that whole concept of I'm gonna like buy my way into this market and stuff. But anyway, I think that's like the really hard challenge, because you do and we even run into that with our enterprise sales, right? Because really we believe what we're looking for is we're looking for like people that are willing to go on this journey with us, because I think they have a complicated ecosystem. You can't change everything overnight. There's like different actors within these larger companies. Like you have a chief digital officer who's concerned about things like delivery promise and conversion and moving over. And then you have a COO who's getting like, beat up all the time about his cost structure. And you kind of have to find a way to like thread the needle to get in there and then make a relationship with both and then start discussing the trade-off. And, but if you sell, like we run into this thing all the time where like, we'll sell against our competition. And then they're like, well, you're just this other, then like, why am I going to, like, why are you better than all these other people that are super cheap and non-premium, right? And that's kind of like the go small version. And then the big vision is people are like, well, I don't give a shit about all that stuff, right? Like, so that's kind of, that's a lot of the challenge. And I think you see that a lot in VC, and when you're pitching VC stuff, is that how do you balance out like North Star, TAM, where this is going to go, potential upsell down the road, all the stuff that you build these SaaS products for versus just like how are you doing right at the moment, right?
Right. It's hard, man.
Yeah.
And it depends on the style of the presenter. It depends on the VC you're presenting to. And that is the hardest part.
Yeah.
For sure.
How did you figure out how much money to ask for? You said $8 million. Why wasn't it 32?
Yeah. I mean, I think, try, like, I feel like part of it is you kind of go in, there's metrics, at least in SaaS world, around like where you are. And so most of the negotiation is kind of like, what's the forward ARR that the multiple is going to work off of against of. And so I think we backed into some of it from that. Some of it was like, I did try to sell, it's kind of like a high floor product, like what we're doing. It's not a, there's kind of SaaS products that you can have one developer put something together and get it going. And, like I'm always amazed at, just some of these companies, it doesn't take a lot to get it going because there's a complementary tool set to get it there. We have a fairly complicated software stack with a bunch of integrations into carriers, and for the size of the company, I think we're like kind of relatively high on the complexity scale. And so I was always pitching kind of that as this like, like technically we're going to need a little more money than the other guy because you're betting on a better long-term result and a bigger moat, right? That's kind of like how we tried to pitch it. And so my point is I use some combination of like a bottoms-up business plan combined with like where, like how many developers we're going to need when, how many people are we going to need through these cycles, combined with like what is actually going to be reasonable on the multiple side was kind of how I triangulated it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the A round, and then I think the A round we definitely like we kind of got in right before the story I tell is I got a term sheet and then like Putin fired missiles the next Monday, and I was like, I had a whole elaborate plan for like, I'm gonna like, I was thinking, maybe I'll go talk to a bunch of other people, but as soon as that happened, I'm like, yeah, where do I sign? What's
the freeway, I'm parking in this neighborhood right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. I mean, I have a question. So reflecting on all this, if you could go back, trying to think how far back you would go. Would you tell yourself to do anything differently?
For the startup or for my career?
Or even in your career path, whichever way you want to take it.
I mean, it's really hard. I think, I think I maybe would have gotten into startup land a little earlier. Yeah. It's like very intimidating to be, Amazon was, it's like a first world problem, right? You're like, the stock was doing so well, it was hard to leave, right? Like that's like, it's not like exactly poor me, right? Yeah. I mean, but I think as you get older and you kind of have more, for me at least, as you kind of have more security built up, you kind of realize like, I definitely value the experience and the mission more than I value kind of like this security. And so I probably would have maybe left a little earlier and tried to do something. But I don't know kind of how much earlier and whatnot. And then on the startup side, I think, I mean, if I knew what I knew, I probably would have made these, it's just like, you're just kind of like grinding through, trying a bunch of things and the kind of like the hardest part in my opinion is like the false positives where you like we had a couple of moments where things would like really started picking up steam, and then I was like, all right, we got this, like, it's all done, and then like just shut down, right? And then you have to go through a couple of those, and that's why whenever you see like those the normal thing is with SaaS is like it's like product market fit is seed to A, and then A to B is go to market fit. That's what they call it, right? And they always have those little graphs where they show like, like new ARR, it goes up and then back down again, and like and these
despair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like the standard stuff, but it's it's like you're all just kind of trying to figure it out, and we had to replace a bunch of people and change the approach, and then I think the other thing that really gets mixed in that's hard when you're on the ground is the market, right? Because you can never tell like if it's something you've changed or if it's just the world's changed around you. It doesn't kind of matter, but that's what I always struggled with. Like I never, we're like, we were selling for this quarter, and then it all just died off. But it kind of corresponds to just these like lulls in SaaS in general. Are you affected by, I mean, all that stuff it's really hard to triangulate on what's happening. And I think you have to, I kind of believe in that thing where great companies are started during recessions. I'm a big fan of that, right? Because it is this like, it forces you to just move into this mode where it's like, okay, what can I control? What can I not control? And just totally hyper focus on what you control and just work your way through it, right?
The pressure cooker of like, we have to do this because if we don't, we're going to die.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly.
It's not about the marble in your lobby.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's like in those down periods. It's like, well, we're going to climb out of this pit.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. We're going to find, like, you know, and we have to. And I think that's like what's so cool about these startups. I mean, that's why it's why all this innovation happens in this model, because it's not going to, something like that is just not going to happen at a large company, right? There's just never going to be that amount of pressure to create that innovation.
Even if they do have their startups within the, they don't seem to have that same.
No, that's how you kind of really truly come up with these innovative business models and kind of push things along.
And so you grew up in Bothell. Talk to us about the journey to the University of Washington.
Yeah, I think I would describe my life as in high school as very normal, right? You know, I don't have anything. There's kind of nothing dramatic about it, and I was a good student, but I wasn't a great student. I always I had from a very early age. I was very interested in computers. I thought they were fascinating. I've kind of lived in the shadow of Microsoft. I remember, you know, that was always kind of floating around, and there was this certain level of fascination with it. But I was effectively like reading books on how to program, learning how to program, going to school. You know, I think more of the math and science thing came a lot easier for me, but not particularly like kind of connected to some degree to what I was doing. I wasn't, I guess you describe as like super high achieving at that point, mostly because I just kind of didn't get it. I didn't know what I wanted to do or why I was doing it. And, you know, one of the things I think is interesting is just today's world, a lot of the school is so, it's so hard for these kids have to kind of be so kind of locked in on what they're going to be and what they need to do and what are the steps they're going to do. And then of course, like correspondingly parents get, you know, they have their own high level of stress about like, is my kid going to go to Stanford? Are they going to be working at Goldman Sachs as an analyst? Are they going to, you know, going on and on list. And I think when I reflect on my kind of childhood, it was just that there was a lot of room. I was still able to get into the University of Washington, which was a great school. And like I said, I wasn't a bad student, but I wasn't a great student by any means. I mean, I was, you know, a fairly high GPA, did fairly well on the SATs, but nothing. But ultimately when I got to school and I was able to kind of start locking in on like, you know, meeting with these kind of great minds in the computer science department and seeing what's going on, I just started it started to kind of make sense. Like, wow, this is really what I want to do with my life. I'm very excited about this. This is the first time I've been excited about learning, and just kind of taking all this in. And so, yeah, I think that was, it was you know, kind of as that built, I got more and more kind of passionate and motivated by this and really knew where I wanted to go with my career in the industry. And, you know, really decided to put all the time in to got really motivated and put a lot of time in on learning how to be a great programmer at the time and understanding everything that you could understand about that. But that's how I got there, you know.
I think if people today maybe don't understand as much that, because we're similar generation, at that time, high school time, being a software engineer was barely a job you could do. And if it was a job, it was more blue collar than anything else.
Yeah.
Right? It was not, there were no stock options, there were no IPOs, there was none of this was like a way to get money. It was for people who like to sit down and be left alone and program in the back of some lab somewhere. That was how I felt about it anyway. Yeah. So the fact that all of this happened to you later on in life was just like this accident of timing and history. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You kind of hit it on a little bit when you said, and I could get into the UW. That's right? That's if I went today, I'd probably be rejected. If you talk, and like the joke among the professors there is they'll tell you that they probably wouldn't get any of this.
Right. Yeah. No, I think there was a lot less, there wasn't the same level of kind of pressure around the whole thing. But yeah, I think it was a very obscure thing back in those days. I think we had a little bit of an advantage being in the Seattle area that Microsoft was front and center, right? And I can't imagine like if I was growing up in Pittsburgh, if I would have the same like perspective on what technology is going to look like in a couple of years. But there was this weird thing, programming. It was very from a very early age. It's like the ultimate form of puzzle. Right. And I'm not talking about gluing things together, kind of even what you would describe as software engineering. But the thing I loved about it was just like this ultimate, like you're just trying to get this thing to work in the way you want it to. And I think the earlier you go, the more kind of cryptic and weird of a puzzle it was back in, because you kind of had to do everything. Right. And there was more constraints on the system in terms of you didn't have like kind of the abstraction libraries and the abstraction layers and the memory management and all the other stuff. So it made it even harder to keep track of all that. But I always thought like, at some point I remember thinking like, this should be like a video game where you're just trying to solve this puzzle. Right. Like, and I loved that in those years and just kind of, it kept kind of building. And, when I had taught myself in kind of high school and junior high, and I was reading books to try to understand it. You can get to a certain point, but I do remember once I got to the university and I started, kind of learning from the professors, they started talking about more of these abstract concepts that you just kind of couldn't get through self-learning, and then your mind starts expanding, right? And then I remember feeling like I just want to know everything there is to know about. I want to understand transistors. I want to understand every aspect of this problem and how all these things fit together. And it was just it's just such a great core memory for me. Like obviously met a lot of great people, but just that whole, I can still smell the like fall air at the University of Washington, just kind of like, just kind of like sitting in the lab with the window open, just cranking through the stuff. It was a lot of fun.
What was your first computer? Do you remember?
Yeah, I had a Atari 400, which there was a bunch of computers in that time period. There was like the Commodore 64. I think Radio Shack had one. There was but my particular one was the Atari 400, and it was basically, it didn't even have a real keyboard. It had like a McDonald's
like a
terminal, cash register style keyboard, right? Yeah, and you'd put a cartridge in, basically, if you wanted to use BASIC, which was the programming thing. And I actually still have that somewhere. It's like I don't know if it'll run, but you'd put it in. I think it had like 16K of RAM or something like that, and it was just amazing what they could accomplish in these tiny little. You start a program now and it's probably like 3 megabytes to just say hello world, right?
Sure.
Back then it was these tiny little.
Sure, the browser's got to stud up.
Yeah,
JavaScript engine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So no, I became fascinated early with this and was trying to figure out how to make it work. So
how did you balance being a computer nerd, with the rest of social life, trying to get through high school?
Yeah. I mean,
have friends and know how to date girls.
Yeah. I mean, just normal stuff that was hard for everybody. That's kind of, I think even I would describe like my athletic career, my social life, like as just kind of average on all fronts, right? Like, you had, like, I had a bunch of friends and I remember kind of tending more towards, I always liked kind of weird people. And so then you end up with a weird combination of like, you're in these kind of, they didn't call them this at the time, but you'd take like more advanced math. They didn't call them like AP back then. They didn't have that concept, but you take like more advanced math. So you'd have like kind of this set of nerd friends, and then you'd also have this kind of set of like weird friends. And because I always like weird people. I like the mix of things. But yeah, we didn't have. I mean, isn't it weird to think like just no phones, no like. you know, I think at my high school, a lot of things were driven by just boredom.
Mhm.
Like when I look back on the whole
Sure.
thing, right? It was all just like, you just didn't have, you were just looking for things to do because there just wasn't anything to, you know, there just wasn't anything to do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
All of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like the people, comedians do jokes about this or whatever. It's like, hey, on Monday I'll meet you there at 3, and you get there at 3, and if the guy's not there, you just hang out. There's no calling.
no
there's
repercussion.
yeah,
Right?
there's nothing to do.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Wait, see?
yeah, probably be here.
Okay.
We said 3. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So you might not even watch. You might just be like, oh,
Yeah. I mean, even like, I remember going to like the mall, and you'd be like, let's meet back here in 45 minutes. And yeah, if they didn't show up, you're just like,
Okay.
all right, I'm done. That's it. Pretty weird.
so you got into the University of Washington Computer Science Department,
Yeah.
which even still, I mean, for everything we said about like we could get in and all that, that was still a big deal at the time. You know?
Yeah. They didn't make you choose your major back then. So you just kind of get in, you could say like what you're going to work on. And there was definitely this concept of like, the weeding out, like, you know, they had these
Those
big
classes.
physics classes that were like graded on a curve and stuff. And that's how they were trying to get rid of people. I had like, personally, I had a little bit of like once I got into college, things kind of started to lock in. I felt very confused up to that point. And I just
Do you
couldn't.
feel like there was a class or a person or a professor that really helps? Like, oh, this is me.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think it was I don't think it was that. I think it was almost like getting out of the, you know, you're in this kind of high school milieu, like of just like what's happening. And you just, and I just couldn't get, I never as a kid could get, like, I just wasn't particularly motivated. You know, it was all just, I was just kind of like, I was doing enough to get through stuff, but I wasn't really, you know, I wasn't like a world,
Latching
and
on.
even like, you know, it was the same with like athletics. I think I probably have like average natural athletics, and I was fairly tall, but I like wasn't really willing to put the work in to become a total superstar and be able to play like college athletics, right? It was, you know, I don't think I was like gifted by any means, but I also was kind of like not really willing. I was much more wanting to hang out with people and screw around and all that stuff. And I think that I think that's kind of what was saying earlier, is it's weird because I think a lot of people don't really like, I don't think they figure out they're late bloomers, you know, and I think we've kind of lost that as it's so hard these days with kids because the expectation is you choose early, right? Like you get this stuff all figured out. And I think a lot of people just don't. They need room to do this stuff, but everything's so tight, you know, and competitive. It's like, yeah,
way too far.
yeah.
Way too far.
Yeah. You probably went through a lot of that, right? Like, I mean,
Well,
everything.
I feel like I was lucky in terms of when phones came in, it was later. So I still feel like I had an unperturbed childhood in that regard.
Yeah.
But even so, I was talking to like a family friend's high school student who's at Newport.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was saying, oh, if you're not doing research with a professor by, you know, freshman year in high school, it's just like, what?
Yeah.
What? That's
Yeah.
insane. Like, you have to be able to be a kid and have the milieu and have
Yeah.
time to try things and kind of
Yeah.
that tension of like, who am I think it's
Yeah.
really important. So that,
Well, so much in that early years is just driven by kind of social insecurities and all that stuff. And that's what I just remember being like, just kind of trying to find a spot. And so when I went to the university, I think some combination of like being around a whole new set of people and taking these classes that I think, you know, you were starting to see like really, these professors were pretty incredible to me. Like it kind of became motivational, and I did do well. I started my school, like, I think my grade point in college was actually higher than high school. I don't even remember what either are now, but you know, like I definitely started, I kind of found my thing and started moving, and it was like, wow, I really enjoy this. This is going to be fun. And,
awesome.
and that's what kind of got there. And so, yeah, I think getting into computer science program was a huge thing. It was relatively small back then too.
I think we were 80 people.
Yeah.
You said
Yeah.
80?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was I was saying like, it really felt like there was something about it that felt like, you know, there was a bit of like I'm really proud of all the folks around me. Like, you know, you got this good, it was very motivating, and you know, we were bouncing ideas off of each other, et cetera. And I think, it's funny when you go to the University of Washington now, though, the computer science, it's like a whole building, and then there's a whole nother building that's attached, like, and they're like, and when we can get this guy to rip this building down, then we'll put another building here. Like, it's just all this, it's crazy how enormous it's become over the last couple of years. So
a small family, now it's like a nation state.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, at the time, they were having trouble getting the legislature to put any money in the computer science department. That was why they had to do a fundraising for their building. It was kind of nutty.
Yeah,
I do think the UW computer science department, you know, credit to Ed Lazowska really, and Hank Levy, those folks for keeping it on the track where it wasn't like a learning to program school, but it also wasn't like, oh, just theory, you know, you never touch the keyboard. It was like kind of right down the middle.
Yeah.
Like you had to program to get through the classes.
Yeah.
And they had but you had to figure it out. Like there were these beginning classes to like learn C and whatever, right?
Yeah.
But beyond that, you had to figure everything out. It was not, they weren't going to hold your hand once you had the baby steps.
And pretty heavy dose of theory, right? I mean,
and then there was enough theory that you like compilers and all, like, so it wasn't, and I've seen too many schools go one way or the other.
Yeah.
Where they go, we're not a coding school. And then, so I don't know. Anything you want to say about the UW's connection to industry, I think is.
Yeah, I think it's good. I think, I mean, maybe a little, I'll like, I thought, it was like fairly theoretical, and that let them, it had enough theoretical that lets you kind of go ahead a little bit. Like you end up leaning into stuff. I think, in terms of like what's coming, right? If you are totally practical, then you end up becoming like this kind of vocational school, and it's just, and you miss out on kind of the underlying, a lot of what I talk to people about sometimes is just, you have to understand the core abstractions to be a really good software engineer, and the kind of the how you compose algorithms and stuff like that. I thought one of the more interesting things is, in retrospect, those years, like the 90s, it was so heavily focused on, we were like, so all about infrastructure and speed, right? Because everything was about like, how do you make like a faster like operating system, or a better compiler, or a better, like better chip to some degree on the other side. And the interesting thing about the program now, when I've come back to visit, and it almost kind of makes me jealous of like, wow, this would have been really fun, is there's a lot more like, you know, data scientists who are figuring out more like, what do we do with all this now that we have all the speed? And I think a lot of the like AI stuff that's happening now, it's almost like you had to go through this infrastructure phase where you connect everyone together and have enough space to store all this shit so that you can actually like start collecting this data to actually start making these really interesting things off of that. And that's where we are kind of now. And I think that's why, the programs are going to probably change quite a bit over the next couple of years as we kind of sort through this. But I think it's a really interesting kind of, changeover that's happening at the moment around what does it mean to be in programming.
That is very interesting. Yeah, at the time, it was like, you would literally be like, I can't do this because there's not enough clock cycles.
Yeah.
And now that's almost never a problem.
Yeah, right.
So much so that, as you mentioned, there's a browser and a JavaScript engine and and like all this stuff. And it's like, and
then you have the kind of data stuff. Well, and then you have this kind of like I'm very curious, like what happens with, the productivity that's coming from some of these tools that are coming out, right? Like we're super early stage, but, and right now it's more or less like, I don't have to go to Stack Overflow to copy this algorithm. I can just have the AI do it for me. But it's like going to be interesting to see where the developer stuff, how much of it they're able to actually, I'm skeptical that it's not going to like replace everything, but it's clearly going to be a productivity tool. Yeah. And how much productivity, I think, is unclear still. But that to me is like, we always had these Paul's talking about like the different milestones, but it was like memory collection added a bunch of productivity. These more abstract languages added a bunch of productivity. Availability of like memory and clock cycles added a bunch of productivity to programmers. These libraries and being able to share them over the internet added a bunch of productivity, right? So it's kind of these different stages, because I do look at like what programmers do now versus how we used to like rewrite. I mean, I don't know how many times I rewrote a linked list. Like it was just like, time to write a new linked list, right? Like you just do this every time. And now those things, like no one even thinks about that. They think about not even the one above it. And this latest round with the AI tools, I'm curious, like it's going to be fascinating to see what they come up with, like what it kind of does to some of the programming stuff. So
what about getting your first job after college?
So well, I remember like how much I made, which was like, I think 38,000 or something, which always blows everyone's mind, right? Like that's the classic.
You're graduating, you're like, that's cheddar right there.
But I was freaking happy, right? But
sure. It's like 38,000. I don't know, what am I going to do with the other $30,000? Yeah,
exactly, right. Yeah, exactly. Save it. What are you talking about? Yeah, I was so into computer science, like I was so like locked in on what we were doing, and we were repping so much, like I was working so hard at that I had quite a few job offers by the time I got out of school. And at the time it was because I like the in vogue thing was like coding tests during interviews. That was kind of the move. And it all kind of came out of Microsoft, and we didn't have, it wasn't as, like now they have like websites where they'll kind of tell you what people are going to ask, but I was just fast, right? Like I remember just like, write this algorithm, and I could just start pounding it out. Didn't matter what it was. We do it on like paper. I remember like 5 sheets of paper with, doing a full blown, implementation of something, right? But that, at the time I just remember I just felt like I could just crank stuff. I could just run through it. I think the place I ended up going to, I had an internship there before, and then I kind of had just transitioned into like a full-time thing. And, that ended up B Square. Yeah. And that was, they were a weird company. It was like the guy who actually started it he was floating around just for a couple of years ago. Like Bill Baxter was his name. And, I think, he did a couple startups after that, but it was totally a bubble era company. They were basically a consulting company. They had like they were trying to get into product stuff. They were working super closely with Microsoft, but they're like, let's IPO. And everyone was like, yeah. and so it was good, made a little money off that, but they didn't really have a true product that they were building on. And so I think they're doing consulting like things now still. But
did they build a compiler suite for WinCE was what they're saying?
Yeah, but it was kind of like not the way that the Microsoft compiler worked, is it had a front end and a back end. And what they were doing was the specific chip architectures. So at the time you had a bunch of there was Hitachi had a chip. ARM was obviously floating around as the thing. There was the MIPS, there was, x86, all the stuff. And they were kind of doing the back end pieces, but it was not like, it was more or less a big consulting job for Microsoft type of thing. So, yeah. Interesting.
We could talk about.
Yeah, but then Amazon called and I was like, all right, I got to get on this internet
thing. How long were you there for?
I was only there for like 2 years, I think. I think I graduated in 97 or something. And then
you knew about Amazon. They were.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, I like to tell the story that I'm pretty sure Amazon came to campus, and I'm like, why the hell would I go work there?
Yeah,
it seems stupid.
I think everybody had that thought.
Yeah, yeah. Like,
so
they were
sell books. I mean,
yeah, but then 2 years went by, and it just became clear that it was becoming clear that the internet was going to be like this major, I mean, obviously, right? But it was like, it was starting to kind of, and the calculus on my part at the time was like, I just need to figure out how to start so I'm going to go to somewhere where it kind of makes sense to me. Cause I like things like eBay seemed kind of like a flash in the pan. But I didn't, none of us had there was no social, there was no like search wasn't really worked out. Search was kind of an afterthought. Everything was browser, like kind of browse based. And so that stuff was too far out. Amazon I liked because it was like, I'm buying books and they come, I like that concept. Let me try this. Right. And so that's kind of how that ended up.
That's right. Search was mostly at the time, it was like Yahoo. And so you had it was literally a tree of websites.
That's right. Yeah, and then you had like searches on top of searches, and it wasn't considered like a high class citizen. It was like most people just found sites directly through linking and like they remember like Yahoo was like had your homepage where you could keep your little links, and they had like you could it was like, we're just gonna make an index for the internet and people will just click through these browse trees, right? And then obviously Google blew that whole thing up, and then a couple years later the social stuff started. And but anyway, my thing at Amazon was I just really wanted, I liked the concept, and went there on kind of a whim. And I remember when I got there, my boss like forgot to give me a computer, and the dog threw up in my office, and it was like downtown. Yeah, it was just like classic, very, very, very good times. A bunch of characters there, all the stuff. So,
do you want to, before we wrap up here, since you mentioned it on the phone, do you want to talk at all about the brownie incident?
I don't remember. Like, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember I was complaining about, I don't remember why I was complaining, but we had this like in the area where we programmed, right? There was these terminals, and then they had this thing called like the community closet or something. It had a better name than that, but basically you'd put in money, like we would stock it with like Costco, snacks, right? And then people would put in money and it'd kind of pay for itself as this little community thing. And there was this brownie, and I was complaining about my brownie. And I think Paul was probably pissed about something he was trying to program or something, and he just like picked up my brownie and just chucked it out the window. Right. And the thing I do remember about this, right, was like I remember like looking and then kind of like processing it in my head and thinking like, I think that was the right thing to do on his part. And then nothing was said, and we just went back to programming, right? Like classic. So, I think at the end of the day, Paul was in the right, so I think it was well deserved. I think I can't remember what the thing was. So
we lost a good brownie that day.
Yeah.
That was basically
a story for the ages. That's hilarious.
I just remember Tim Bradley was on the other side of you when that happened, and he goes, "You probably didn't want that anyway."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. No, it would get like hot and frustrating in those labs at some point. Yeah. So you'd be grinding away out there.
All-nighters in there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all that stuff.
So that's the good stuff.
Oh yeah, we were on terminals, right, on those remote terminals, and then but the graduate lab, you had your actual own local copy of Windows. Remember? That was like donated and all that.
Yeah.
Stuff? Wow.
Yeah, and they had the like, remember what was the company? Sun was the big company back then, like Sun Microsystems, and you had a couple like you could get on the actual machine, the box, and I remember like I accidentally tripped over a cord or something, and a bunch of people were like, "You killed my session," right? Like everyone going nuts, right? Like all that kind of stuff. It's just funny. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that at Amazon early too. Like some guy was running some software that was running in the fulfillment center, was on the PC under his desk, and so like the cleaner would come by and kick it and the whole fulfillment center would shut down, shit like that, right? I mean, it's so far from now. Like now you go in these discussions and they're like, do you have 3 or 4 co-locations in case there's a major earthquake? And like literally one location under the desk, one wire to this place, right? Just totally nuts. Yeah. Like it's amazing how much the world has changed in 25 years or whatever, right? Like how much the things have evolved. Like we've got tiny supercomputers in our pockets. And
all right, buddy. Well, here's the 25 more, right?
Exactly.
All right.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It was great having you. It was great to be here. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Jason, thanks so much.
Awesome.
Really fun.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Tech Out West.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter and YouTube. And of course, reach out with any ideas of who you want us to interview next at techoutwest@gmail.com. We'll see you on the next one.